good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well this fine Saturday. It's feeling a little bit like spring outside today, but I've been inside making videos. Did 2 videos this morning, one on the Sebastian Rogers case for this channel, just a short video. And then over on Michelle Walks, again, another short video, but I covered Jenny Hall. She is missing, 23-year-old woman missing from near, just outside Durham, here in the UK. So go and check those out. But here, right now, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, we are talking about the Idaho 4 case and Bryan Kohberger. I went to check, because it seems like forever since I last talked about the Idaho 4 case. And indeed it was. The last video I made about Idaho was in September of last year. So 5 months ago. But never fear, I have been keeping up with the case, been watching all the hearings. I've been checking in on the court filings as they come along. But it's inspired me to cover this because there's been a lot. Recently, there was 2 days of hearings in which Bryan Kohberger's defense tried lots of ways to get stuff thrown out, things suppressed, and they requested a Franks hearing. Now, we've heard a lot about Franks versus Delaware. We've heard a lot about Franks in Delphi. Well, we've got Franks again here in Idaho. And the judge has rejected everything. Outright, no, the judge ain't playing. Now, for those who have only very loosely been following this case, there has been a change of judge and a change of venue. So the case is now being heard in Ada County rather than Latah County. And Judge John Judge recused himself. I don't know whether he just retired completely or he just recused himself from the case. I'm not really sure. I don't think it matters. So we now have a very stern judge. I do like him, though. He does not put up with any kind of shit. And he is willing to argue. And he's good. I like him. Judge Stephen Hippler. And one thing that sets him aside from Judge Gull is that when he orders something, he actually explains why. He doesn't just go denied without hearing, with absolutely no reasoning behind it. So this is why we're here. We're going to read the judge's order in which he rejected the Franks motion. Now, there have been a lot of filings. So we've had, these are all judges' orders that came out on the 19th. So Judge Hitler has been missing, he's been missing in action. I'm sure that his family haven't seen him for quite some time because he's been very busy. This is his order on defendant's motion to suppress the evidence regarding AT&T, Google, Apple and Amazon. They wanted it all gone. Also, they wanted gone the genetic information, the genetic genealogy information. They wanted that gone. Now, that particular argument has rumbled on for a long time. And I did think during the hearings, I did think that Ann Taylor's arguments on why the genetic information should be excluded was very weak. I really do think it was very, very weak. And then we had also the defendant's motion to suppress the arrest warrant from Pennsylvania, the apartment warrant, and the warrant to search his person. And this one I had to laugh at. Her argumentation regarding why they should get rid of this was bad. It was really bad. That said, I am very glad that Bryan Kohberger has got a defense team who is willing to argue the minutiae. It leaves them with very little to come back with on appeal, in my opinion. So then again, we're not even close to trial yet. This has been going on for such a long time. The murders occurred in November of 2022. And just one thing and another, we're now in 2025. And I think the trial is going to be this summer sometime. So finally, and I don't think Judge Hitler is going to put up with many more delays, honestly. So we're going to read the Frank's motion. Each one of these was like around 30 pages. So this one is 38 pages. This is the judge's order as to why he's denied them a Frank's hearing. That said, you know, recently we've had 2 days of hearings in which the defense was able to put on their case as to why they should have a Frank's hearing. So, like I said, this is like night and day difference with Delphi. These are not just deny without hearing. These are deny, but these are deny with a very, very detailed reasoning as to why these things are denied. So the AT&T, Google, etc., 36 pages. The genetic information, 29 pages. The arrest warrant stuff, 11 pages. And then the Frank's order, 38 pages. So we're not going to read them all. I might do a separate video on the genetic information if people would like it, because that's something that is of particular interest to me. So I will do that separately and go through that if you want me to. But in reading this judge's order as to the denial of the Frank's hearing, it does cover some of the issues that were brought up in those other orders anyway. So it's up to you. If you want me to do that, I will do. Yeah, glad the judges finally said enough is enough. Endless holdups. Again, like I said, I don't mind. I don't mind Bryan Kohberger having a rigorous defense who is willing to organize themselves in such a way where they're covering everything. They're trying to get everything suppressed. You know, if they suppress one thing, well, it's the fruit of the poisonous tree. We've got to suppress more, and we've got to, I don't know, get rid of everything. I don't mind them doing that. But it has gone on a long time. Anyway, while we're in the chat, let's say a couple of hellos here. We've got Down Under with Love. Good day to you. It must be night time for you. Surely, must be night time. So good night to you. We've got Puppy Love. We've got CW on the fence. Don't follow, no clue if you did it. Got splinters as I'm firmly on the fence. Well, look, I'm up front. I think they got the right guy. I do. Because I haven't seen anything that convinces me to the contrary. That said, if I do find information or information comes out at trial that is to the contrary, I'll change my opinion on a dime, as I always will. So at this moment in time, I believe they've got the right guy. But I don't mind if you believe that he's completely innocent, that they've got the wrong guy or someone else did it. As long as you're respectful in the chat, all opinions are welcome. I do like the judge. I do as well. I do. I like John Judge as well. I did like John Judge, but I think he was too soft. Like Ann Taylor was, you know, like barrel rolling him in some ways. So I think he was kind of too soft for this case. But yeah, I liked him. But I do like Judge Hitler. He doesn't mess about. Yeah. I mean, look, a lot has come out already. And Judge Hitler does talk about a lot of stuff that, some of which we didn't know in this slew of orders. So, he's not hiding behind, we've got to keep all this stuff hidden. He's not. Hello, Jazz, Stephen, Purple AJ. Hello, nice to see you. Criminal Med, Riley's Nanny, Kelly, Journey takes a trip, sitting in the sunshine with the back doors open. That's nice. That's nice. It's sunny here. It's a little bit chilly, but it does feel like spring. And all of my little flowers are flowering. My crocuses are flowering. My daffodils are soon going to be flowering. So I hope we don't have any deep freezes, or else it's going to kill my little flowers. I've got snowdrops. Kind of cute, little tiny snowdrops. Anyhow, we got Amy. We got Sassy. We got Deborah. It's just me, Mandy, Jennifer, Yvonne. All right. Gonna get to it. So, like I said, we're not going to read all of these. It's over 100 pages. We're going to read the Franks. We're going to read the Franks in its entirety. All right. So, this is the judge's order explaining in very, very minute detail as to why he's denied the defence of Frank's hearing. So, defendant is charged with 1 count of burglary and 4 counts of murder in the first degree. It's alleged that defendant entered a residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022 and killed Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan and Xana. Defendant is requesting a Franks hearing. Franks versus Delaware. I can't remember the year. 1978. I should know this off by heart inside out because of Delphi. Oh dear. Claiming law enforcement intentionally or recklessly misrepresented and or omitted several material facts in their probable cause affidavits supporting various search warrant applications. These misrepresentations or omissions, according to defendant, affect the validity of 17 different search warrants. So there's a total of 25 search warrants issued in this investigation between December 23rd, 2022 and August 1, 2023. For each issue analysed in this order, the court has identified the date range for the specific warrants defendant claims are implicated. Can you see how detailed this is? Are you watching, Judge Gull? This is what a judge's order should look like, with the law and everything. Not just denied without hearing because I said so. No, this is very, very good judging. Very good judging. Regardless of whether you think Bryan is innocent or not, this is good judging. You've got to admit. All right. The state responds that defendant has failed to make the requisite substantial preliminary showing under Franks. Remember, they've already had a hearing where the defence were able to put on as much evidence as they wanted, make as many arguments as they wanted. Judge Hitler questioned them, and also I could tell by the way it was going that there was going to be denials here. I could tell by Judge Hitler, but at least they were allowed, unlike in Delphi, they were allowed to have a hearing to say why the Franks was needed. The judges rejected it, but not without allowing them to have lengthy arguments. Okay. State response, defendant has failed to make the requisite substantial preliminary showing under Franks that 1, law enforcement either made false statements or omitted material information knowingly and intentionally or with reckless disregard for the truth, and or 2, that the false statements or omissions were necessary to a finding of probable cause. So he's got a lot of footnotes in here, but I'm not going to read this in entirety. Defendant's motion for Franks, November 14th, 2024, was accompanied by a memorandum, and then just what the court subsequently asked them to do. But again, there was a hearing on this, and this is his decision based on not just the filings, but also the extensive arguments made at the recent hearings. A hearing on defendant's motion was held January 23rd, 2025. In the interest of evidentiary efficiency, the court permitted a full Franks hearing on the motion only insofar as it pertained to the alleged omission of information regarding defendant's identification through investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG. On the remaining challenges, the court permitted argument on defendant's proffer as to whether defendant had satisfied his burden to warrant a subsequent Franks hearing. The court then took the matter under advisement. Got a couple of more footnotes here. This was identified as issue 5 in defendant's amended memorandum. The court notes that in response to some Frank's challenges, the state submitted and argued evidence that was not included in defendant's proffer. While this evidence shall be considered as a Frank's hearing, that this stage only permits the court to consider whether defendant had made the substantial preliminary showing under Frank's to warrant a hearing. The court should not give the government an opportunity to present its evidence on the validity of the warrant without converting the hearing into a full evidentiary Frank's hearing, including full cross-examination of government witnesses. Consequently, on those challenges, the court is only relying on defendant's exhibits and the parties' arguments regarding why or why not, based on that proffer, a Frank's hearing is warranted. So we've got rationale throughout. So, somebody can come along who is a legal eagle and pick this apart. But what you cannot do is say that Judge Hitler has been, trying to hide the ball here or trying to do something underhand, because it's all out there, right? Like I said, he must have been missing in action for quite some time, because this must have taken a little while for him to do this. There is some overlap between them all, the 4 documents that I've showed you. There's some overlap in terms of the introduction and some of the paragraphs, because, some of the paragraphs, matter for this, like they matter for the other documents. Thank you, Jennifer, for the $1.99. Hit the like. Yes, please do hit the like button. It just helps with the algorithm. It's not about my ego. It's about helping it just get up there in the algorithm. Also, if you watch my videos and my live streams and you're not yet subscribed, please do so. I'm trying to get up to 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year. As we're only in February, I think it's doable. So if you watch my stuff, please do subscribe. It's completely free. Just click the subscribe button. That's all you need to do. All right. The court concludes that the search warrants are not invalid based on the omission of defendant's identification through IgG, because that information would have only bolstered probable cause for the searches, as I've been saying throughout. All this argument about IgG, it's like there was probable cause without IgG. So you can take the IgG out and there's still probable cause. But the defense has said, well, if it wasn't for the IgG, they'd never have got to Bryan Kohberger. So chuck out IgG and you basically chuck out the case. That's what they've been trying to say, which I understand. I get it. I get where they're going with it. However, I think they would, in my opinion only, I think they would have got to Kohberger even if they'd not done IgG. It might take a little bit longer, but they would have got to Kohberger, I'm sure. Okay. As to the remaining challenges, the court finds defendant has failed to carry his preliminary burden under Frank's and therefore denies his motion for a Frank's hearing. And this is all the reason why. All right, this is all his analysis now. For the next 36 pages, this is how Judge Hitler has come to his decision. Rightly, in my opinion. Then again, I'm not a lawyer. But rightly, I believe he's made the right decision here. So, standard. In a Frank's motion, the trial court's determination as to whether a representation is false and whether a misrepresentation or omission was made knowingly and intentionally or with reckless disregard for the truth, a factual determination is reviewed under a clearly erroneous standard. Okay. Whether a misrepresentation or omission is material is a question of law, freely reviewed. Analysis. We've read those, haven't we? All right. Analysis. For a search warrant to be valid, it must be based on probable cause, as we all know. State versus Fisher, 2004. In Franks versus Delaware, the United States Supreme Court held the defendant can void a search warrant and suppress the fruits of the search, fruits of the poisonous tree, when the affidavit used to procure the warrant contains a knowingly and intentional or recklessly false statement that is material to the probable cause determination. If you want to know what that kind of thing looks like, then go over to Delphi, read the PCA, and that was used to get the search warrants for Rick Allen stuff, and then look at the actual truth. That's what lies look like when you're trying to get a search warrant. Okay. Right. I'm not going to mention Delphi all the way throughout, don't worry. If you're following Idaho, you're not following Delphi, and you're getting sick of me comparing it to Delphi. I'm comparing it to Delphi only in so much as for two reasons. One, the judge in Delphi is absolutely terrible, whereas the judge here has done well. And in both cases, we've got, the issue of Franks that has come up. Those are the only reasons why I'm mentioning Delphi, but I'll stop honest and I'll carry on with just Idaho from now on. All right. Where the defendant makes a substantial preliminary showing that is a false statement, knowingly and intentionally, or with disregard for the truth, was included by the affiant in the warrant affidavit. And if the allegedly false statement is necessary to the finding of probable cause, the Fourth Amendment requires that a hearing is held at the defendant's request. Okay. So the decision that Judge Hitler has made here is based on what the defense said in their filing for these things, and also from the two-day hearing that they had back in January. So he's heard all those arguments, and this is his decision based on all of those arguments. Idaho has adopted the rule established in Franks and extended it to deliberate or reckless omissions of material exculpatory facts in affidavits, State versus Gasman from 1992. An omission of exculpatory facts is material only if there is a substantial probability that had the omitted information been presented, it would have altered the magistrate's determination of probable cause. So it has to be substantial. Can't just be something that's, I don't know, a little bit of mace or whatever. If it didn't substantially change the material facts, then it's okay. Got to be substantial, and it's got to be something that would have altered the judges or the magistrate, whoever signed the warrant. It would have changed their opinion about probable cause. It would have said, it would have made them go, hold on a minute, where's your probable cause? This is very weak. This is too weak. Not going to sign these warrants. So it's got to be substantial enough. Can't just be little nitpicky things. It's got to be substantial. The analysis under Franks is a two-step process. The first step considers whether the defendant has made a substantial preliminary showing that the affiant knowingly and intentionally or recklessly falsified or omitted information from his or her affidavit. While the Franks court did not define this burden precisely, it is generally held to be something more than conclusory allegations, but less than proof by preponderance. Okay. Courts have said that this requires direct evidence of the affiant's state of mind, or else circumstantial evidence of a subjective intent to deceive. So there's got to be intent to deceive. They've got to have done this either knowingly or at least recklessly, right? And it's got to be substantial for it to warrant throwing out that entire warrant and then anything that results from it. Okay. So reckless means a high degree of awareness of probable falsity. Whether an omission was intentional or reckless may be inferred in part from the relative importance of the information and its exculpatory power. So if there's clearly exculpatory stuff that they've hidden, they've not told the judge when signing the warrant, or they've completely lied, that is substantial, right? They just completely lied knowingly, or they should have known that it was a lie. That's substantial if it would have changed the judge's or the magistrate's opinion as to whether they were going to sign the warrant. But Judge Hitler is not seeing these things here. Negligent or innocent misrepresentation or omissions, even if necessary to establish probable cause, will not invalidate a warrant. Interesting. Okay, so this is Peterson. The challenger's attack must be more than conclusory and must be supported by more than a mere desire to cross-examine. There must be allegations of deliberate falsehood or of reckless disregard for the truth, and those allegations must be accompanied by an offer of proof. They must point out specifically the portion of the warrant affidavit that is claimed to be false, and they should be accompanied by a statement of supporting reasons. Again, this defense team have been allowed to, argue. At a 2-day hearing, they've been able to argue to their heart's content all of these points in front of Judge Hitler. So I think he's in good standing to be able to make these decisions. Affidavits or sworn otherwise reliable statements of witnesses should be furnished or their absence satisfactorily explained. Interesting. If the defendant successfully shows an intentional or knowing or reckless inclusion of a false statement or omission of exculpatory information, the trial court must then examine whether the remaining information in the affidavit is sufficient to establish probable cause. So even if there was a lie, even if there was a big fat lie in there, or an omission, like they just missed out some exculpatory evidence because they knew it was exculpatory, even if they did that, but the rest of the affidavit was sound, and taking out the lie or taking out the omission, if the rest of it was sound to establish probable cause, well, then the magistrate would have signed it anyway, and therefore that does not include, excluding it in any way. So if there's one lie or one omission or one problem, but the rest of it's sound, or after examination, to establish probable cause, then you still don't throw out that search warrant. Okay. All right. A Franks hearing will be required only if the false or omitted information was necessary to a finding of probable cause. If a defendant makes a substantial preliminary showing under Franks, the matter moves to an evidentiary hearing, where the defendant must establish by a preponderance of evidence that intentional or reckless falsehoods were included in the warrant affidavit and were material to the magistrate's finding of probable cause, or that material exculpatory information was deliberately or recklessly omitted. If at this stage, where the state can provide additional evidence for the court to consider. All right, here, defendant claims that 17 search warrants issued in the investigation of the crime were based on false, misleading statements and or omitted exculpatory information in the various search warrant affidavit. His proffer is arranged by issue, of which there are 13. As mentioned, for convenience's sake, the court granted an evidentiary hearing on the IGG issue. They already had that. They had that. They were allowed. It's gone on. This IGG issue has gone on for months. Months, I tell you. They finally got down to an evidentiary hearing. And Judge Hitler wasn't impressed. So the court was informed that the evidence of this issue substantially overlapped with evidence that was to be presented on defendant's motion to suppress read-genetic information. Given that, the court concluded it would be more efficient to have a full Franks hearing on the IGG issue, since it was slated to largely be presented anyway. So they've done that. They've had the evidentiary hearing on the genetic information, which is this. Okay, so this is his order denying, but that was based on very detailed arguments on IGG. As I said, I thought that the arguments on this were pretty weak from what we've seen. Now, some of this was done in private, but from what was out there, and what is out there is pretty weak. This has been released as well. Hold on. 175-page transcript. This Judge Hitler's released. Redacted proceedings before the Honourable Stephen Hitler. I'm not going to read all this, but this is based on the closed proceedings. So the stuff that the public didn't hear, this has now been, the transcript's been released. There's some redactions. I haven't read it all, but I'm just saying it's out there. So Judge Hitler is not trying to hide anything. You know, the reason why some things have been closed hearings is because of privacy concerns for, you know, completely innocent people. So you can kind of understand that. Anyhow, all right, back to Frank's. Okay, so where were we? This evidence will be considered under preponderance of evidence standard, whether the proffer on the remaining issues will be considered under the substantial preliminary showing standard. All right. So he goes through each point in turn. Is Osbrook a YT creator? No, he's not. He's a law professor. He talks on panels and stuff. What is the judge called? Hitler. Yeah, I keep hearing Hitler. Hitler. So Hippler. Hitler. Maybe I should enunciate a little bit better. Hitler, not Hitler. Hitler. Stephen Hitler. All right, so A, defendant has not met is Frank's burden on issues 1 and 2 challenges to Exhibit A. In issues 1 and 2, defendants challenges Exhibit A, which is a probable cause statement that individual investigative officers appended to their affidavits in seeking search warrants. As defendant notes, Exhibit A was a working document drafted as a group effort amongst the multiple investigative officers working on the homicide investigation. In their respective search warrant applications, the officers submitted and swore to Exhibit A as their own, even though it was the product of collective effort and not necessarily limited to the swearing officer's own investigation. In issue 1, a defendant challenges this approach, arguing that Exhibit A was treated as a wild card to easily get a warrant. A wild card. In issue 2, it challenges alleged misrepresentation in Blaker Exhibit A, Mowry Exhibit A, and Payne Exhibit A. So Blaker, Mowry, and Payne were different officers who were the signed officers on certain search warrants, but they were using the same probable cause document in those warrants, or to you know, get those warrants signed. So that's what we're talking about. So Exhibit A basically is the probable cause affidavit that we've probably all read. I certainly read it when it came out. I read it into the record on this channel, and it's been poured over ever since. All right, so defendant has not met his burden under Frank's on issues 1 or 2. First, it's not improper for law enforcement seeking a warrant to swear to matters within the collective knowledge of other officers involved in the same investigation. And in the preliminary hearing back in January, so a month ago, you know, the defense called these officers to the stand, questioned them. So again, the judges allowed them all of that time to do that. Second, defendant has not demonstrated in his proffer any misrepresentation or omissions, much less that they were made intentionally, recklessly, or had any effect on probable cause. So we've got defendant submits Exhibit D. So issue 1 refers to all search warrants. Issue 2 replies to search warrants on December 29th and later. So this is a group effort. These exhibits are emails between Special Agent Nick Balance of the FBI and Detective Brett Payne of the Moscow PD, which were exchanging drafts of probable cause statement. All right, so Judge Hitler says that that's not a problem, it's a group effort. In addition to the draft Exhibit A, defendant has provided with his proffer the following 3 actual Exhibit A's, which were submitted by officers in their search warrant applications. 1, the statement of Dustin Blaker supporting the search warrant application for defendant's Pullman apartment and his office in Washington State University. The Blaker's exhibit, statement of Lawrence Mowry supporting the search warrant application for the defendant's Google account. And 3, the statement of Brett Payne supporting the warrant application for defendant's arrest. These actual Exhibit A's are not identical to the draft Exhibit A or to each other. Nevertheless, defendant challenges them collectively on issue 1 on grounds that they are largely the same statement and contains the same core set of advertisements. Well, of course they will, because they're all about the same murder, aren't they? They're all about the same thing. So there's going to be a lot of overlapping. So to develop the probable cause affidavit for his arrest and then the subsequent search warrants, of course, they're going to be drawing on a lot of the same facts, aren't they? So, yeah, the probable cause statement, Exhibit A, which we've all seen, you know, it was signed by Brett Payne, wasn't it, originally? But there are others that came out that are very similar. We've seen them. We've seen them all. All right. So defendant has not demonstrated any impropriety in law enforcement's execution of Exhibit A based on collective knowledge. There was one of them, I don't know whether it was Blaker or Mowry, who included a little bit more information than we'd originally seen, which was really interesting. I can't remember now. I can't remember which one it was. I remember reading them though. All right. It's well settled that statement of law officers must be based upon observations of fellow officers participating in the same investigation carry a presumption of reliability. Observations of fellow officers of the government engaged in a common investigation are plainly a reliable basis for a warrant applied by one of the number. Okay, that's United States versus Venjushka. The presumption extends to hearsay information from government officials who, while engaged in investigatory responsibilities, discover evidence of probable criminal activity. The presumption arises from the belief that facts are gathered in the course of an investigation are unlikely to be based upon mere speculation or tainted by personal involvement with the suspects. Defendant acknowledges that a warrant can be based on law enforcement's common knowledge. And if they're working as a group, there's certain things that become common knowledge, but argues that officers cannot sign a collectively drafted affidavit as their own without identifying who did the work described herein or therein. Otherwise, it misleads the magistrate into believing that the swearing officer drafted the affidavit and performed the work therein when it was a collective effort. Now, she went to pains. It was a little bit painful listening to this argument. And I could tell that Judge Hitler wasn't going for it. It's like, oh, just stop. You're keeping digging when he's clearly not going for it. But they were allowed. They were allowed to offer all the arguments. Hitler questioned them. They brought their witnesses. So this is the result of all of that. This hyper-technical argument has no traction under Franks, and nor should it. It was a silly argument. Whether, if a search warrant affidavit does not specifically identify the precise source of the information from within law enforcement, it is still sufficient to support probable cause if a reader would reasonably infer that the information came from other law enforcement personnel. In Wilson, for example, the defendant challenged an officer's search warrant affidavit on grounds that the swearing officers did not identify, 1, which facts were based on his own personal knowledge as opposed to hearsay information from other sources, or 2, whether he had personally viewed the evidence, 3, the source of information for the drug dog's training and experience. I don't know Wilson at all, so I'm just reading it as it says it. And 4, the identity of sources he contacted for the information, noting that search warrant affidavits are not to be reviewed and tested in a hyper-technical manner. The Idaho Court of Appeals rejected the defendant's argument, finding that a common sense reading of the affidavit should allow the magistrate to reasonably infer that the information came from the officer's own observations or those of other officers engaged in the investigation. You see, you know, it's common sense. You know that when there's a whole team, you know, multiple agencies all working together on a case, there is going to be common knowledge between them that they know. And then, you know, when one of them is writing a search warrant, then they're going to be using the same information that is now common knowledge amongst that group of officers who are doing that investigation. It is common sense. And again, it seems to be to, the layperson that I am, that Anne Taylor's arguments here were getting into minutiae that were somewhat meaningless. It was not a little bit nonsensical. So I'm glad Hitler has made that point very clear for everybody. A to Z member for 9 months. Compare the order to one of Siegel's orders. Exactly as I said earlier. Exactly. It's like night and day. This is how an order should be written, with the law, with the explanation. Exactly. Here, defendant's evidence demonstrates there were several law enforcement agencies working together in this case, including the Idaho State Police, the Moscow Police Department, and the FBI. During his testimony from a prior hearing in this matter, Detective Brett Payne from the Moscow Police Department explained that agents from these 3 agencies were co-located at a command center set up at the Moscow Police Department for purposes of the investigation. Yeah, they were all like sharing one room. They were all like in the same location. So the comparing information, the sharing information, there's a lot of common knowledge there being built up that each of them can then use, to write their own search warrants as needed. There's not a problem with that at all. Not a problem, except in Anne Taylor's mind. But anyway, these agents were assigned different investigative tasks. Pertinent information they learned in performing those tasks was then exchanged and transmitted into a working probable cause affidavit, draft A, which was the original one, the arrest warrant. Right, that was the original draft A. That was Payne, and then subsequently others came out based on, different search warrants. So they were largely the same. There were some differences, but it was all based on this collective knowledge that they were building up as they were all working together. That's how it should be. That's exactly how it should be. The information from the draft Exhibit A was then incorporated by law enforcement by varying degrees into the Exhibit A's supporting the search warrant applications. Importantly, the Exhibit A's challenged by defendant included statements alerting the magistrate that the affiant was assisted by other law enforcement agents and that the information contained within the Exhibit A was based on information provided by these other agents. See Blaker's Exhibit A. I am being assisted by other officers of the Moscow Police Department, members of the Idaho State Police, and agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As found in Wilson, this is sufficient to allow the reviewing magistrate to reasonably infer that the information within Exhibit A came from not only the affiant's personal knowledge, but knowledge of other law enforcement investigating the crime. Moreover, given the breadth of information in the affidavit, it's easily apparent that the affiant did not perform all the work identified therein as his own. Further, defendant has not cited a single case supporting the proposition that law enforcement use of a working probable cause affidavit is improper, because there isn't any. There isn't any, because this is how investigations work. Oh dear. In sum, defendant has failed to make the requisite showings under Franks on issue 1. Further, no other circumstances could be reasonably concluded that had the swearing officer disclosed which members of law enforcement provided which piece of information, the magistrate would not have found probable cause. So, what Anne Taylor's saying is, well, say that Blaker did that bit and Mowry did that bit and somebody else did that bit and somebody else did that bit. Does that change? Does that substantially change the magistrate's opinion? No, because the information therein is still accurate. So no, it was a ridiculous argument. All right. 2, defendant has not established that alleged misrepresentation in any of the 3 challenge search warrant affidavits compels a Franks hearing. Okay, I need a drink here. I had to hold 2 lives to go over these. Oh, Salty Sleuth, have you read these documents? There's a lot of information, yeah. A lot of information. I'm just reading this one, but if people want me to go over the IGG one, like in a separate video, I will do. Because the IGG stuff is of particular interest to me. So, but like I said, there's a lot of like shared information, like all of these different orders. There's some of the same information in them, like the introductory parts and stuff. So. All right. The first misrepresentation identified by defendant in issue 2 is contained in Blaker Exhibit A, supporting the warrant application for defendant's Pullman apartment. So this is on the Washington State University's campus and his office at Washington State University. Defendant claims that Sergeant Blaker attributes discovering the knife sheath to Idaho State police officers rather than Detective Payne. However, as the state correctly notes, defendant's challenge is nothing more than a quibble over semantics. Absolutely. This is why I said at the beginning, you know, these arguments was going over minutiae stuff. It was like, pick. When you start doing that, it doesn't matter whether it's a murder case or anything else. When you start pick at the tiny stuff, the stuff that's the vast majority of people will consider inconsequential, you know there's not a real argument there. I'm sorry, you know, you're just trying to find something, like throwing loads of darts at a board to hope that one of them sticks. Well, Hitler is not having it. Not having it. Because none of these things warrant throwing out of anything. They just pick. That's all. It's like little nags, but it doesn't change anything. Like, remove one of those things, doesn't change anything in totality. However, as the state correctly notes, defendant's challenge is nothing more than a quibble over semantics. What Sergeant Blaker stated was, I was later advised by the Idaho State Police investigators they located a tan leather knife sheath lying on the bed next to Morgan's right side when viewed from the door. In fact, it was Detective Payne who was the first investigator to discover the knife sheath. Once discovered, Detective Payne notified ISP investigators. And remember how many people would have been in that house, right? So Detective Payne found it, but, you know, very, very quickly, there'd be other people. He's going to, you know, notify everybody. Who actually found the knife sheath becomes irrelevant, doesn't it, really? Like, who actually found it becomes irrelevant when you're writing all of these search warrants. As at best, Sergeant Blaker's use of the word locate is ambiguous as to whether it means discovering or collecting. Dear me, this is it. These are the nitpicks. Under no reasonable reading could it be characterized as a misrepresentation, let alone an intentional or reckless false one. So, arguing that the use of the word locate is a problem, would that change the magic? You know, if you change that word locate for something else, would it have changed the magistrate signing that search warrant? No. It's a nitpick. It's not substantial. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. So no. The second alleged misrepresentation are in Payne Exhibit A, supporting defendant's arrest warrant application, and Mowry Exhibit A, supporting the Google warrant application. Defendant claims that both detectives simultaneously claim to have done cell site location information work, as well as work to determine whether the defendant's cell phone was in the area of the King Road residence. Defendant notes, however, that both detectives admitted at a subsequent hearing in this matter that it was actually the FBI cast agent, Nicholas Balance, who performed the location work that the detectives then used to complete their respective affidavits. These exhibits both state, after consulting with FBI cast, I was able to determine. So they've even said after consulting with the FBI. I was able to determine estimated locations for the phone from June 2022 to present. Records for the phone showed that the phone utilised cellular resources that provide coverage in the area of 1122 King Road. So saying that they did the work is not wrong, is it? And again, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. They both said, after consulting with the FBI, I was able to determine. So they're not saying they did their work alone, as the defence were trying to state, and then both of them said that. No, they were all working together. But after consulting with the FBI CAS team, they were able to determine that they needed a warrant for this, and that's what they wrote in. Dear me. That Agent Balance was the individual who actually did the location work does not render the detective's statements intentionally or recklessly false or even misleading. While defendant asserts that the detective both claim to have done the work, they do not. They state that they were able to determine the location after consulting with FBI CAS. Both detectives explained in their respective affidavits that CAS was the FBI Cellular Analysis Survey Team. That's what CAS stands for. Thus, it was made abundantly apparent to the magistrate that the detectives were relying on work performed by a more specialised law enforcement agent in determining the cell phone location. So they're not trying to misrepresent or say that they did this stuff on their own. It was after consultation with FBI CAS that they determined this. So it's clear as day. In sum, as to the statements encompassed in issue 2, defendant has not established that a misrepresentation was made. Moreover, even if the challenged statements could possibly be construed as false, there was not a shred of evidence they were intentionally or recklessly false. It's abundantly clear what they were trying to say. Dear me. Dear me. Finally, even if the statements were intentionally or recklessly included, defendant has not established they were necessary to establish probable cause. In a common and massive investigation such as this, which specific members of law enforcement actually discover the knife sheath or perform the location work, is irrelevant to probable cause. As I said, it's irrelevant as to whether Brett Payne found the knife sheath or Officer B or Officer C found the knife sheath. Ultimately, you've got this huge investigation. Who actually put their eyes on it first is irrelevant to the probable cause that comes later, because the probable cause is based on a totality of a whole bunch of evidence. Who found the knife sheath becomes irrelevant. Dear me. What is important is that information came from other law enforcement personnel, which is a reliable basis for the warrant. So, Franks, no, based on that issue. Defendant makes a cursory allegation within issue 2 regarding an email Agent Balance sent to Detective Payne, identifying the dates and times of prior occasions that defendant's cell phone was using cellular resources consistent with it being in the area of 1122 King. Defendant contends the dates in the email were different than those in Agent Balance's CAS report. So we're now saying that dates of emails were wrong and therefore they should throw out the entire search warrant. Come on now. However, defendant has not identified a search warrant affidavit that includes these alleged inconsistent dates. So they're irrelevant anyway. The Balance put the wrong date of an email in one CAS report. It didn't make its way into a probable cause affidavit. So it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to whether or not the magistrate would sign it or not. Stop being silly. Dear me. Thus, to the extent defendant is claiming the dates and the emails were false, Franks is not implicated. It's not even relevant. Dear me. So far as the challenge pertains to omissions regarding DM's reliability, which we're going to come on to. All right. Like DM, Dylan, one of the surviving roommates, she's been dragged. By this defense. And we're going to come on to her statement. She said what? Said the defense. All these conflicting statements. Were they really? We're going to come on to that in a minute. All right. DM was a roommate of the deceased. Had her own bedroom at the time. Okay. We're going to come on to DM right now. She said what? Oh, my word. She said what? Okay. Defendant has not met his Franks burden on issue 3. Eyewitness statements. So this is relating to DM, omissions of things DM said or contradictory statements she made. Let's see what Judge Hippler thinks of all this. In issues 3 and 10, defendant challenges the probable cause statements insofar as they set forth witness DM's interview descriptions of things she heard and saw on the night of November 13th, 2022. Defendant claims that law enforcement failed to inform the magistrate that DM's accounts describing the suspect were variable, that she questioned her memory, and that she did not recognize defendant when providing with a photo of him after the arrest. Well, the reason why she couldn't describe it or say, yeah, this mugshot is definitely him, is because he was wearing a mask. So, of course, you can't 100% say that's him because he was wearing a mask. If she said that's 100% him because he's got bushy eyebrows, well, that would have been wrong for the defense, wouldn't it? And probably rightly so. But she said, I'm not sure. I don't know because he was wearing a mask. So she was, in my opinion, DM has been telling the truth throughout. In my opinion, there's no need to rubbish her statements, in my opinion. We're going to get into it as Judge Hippler did. But in my opinion, making statements, let's say in multiple interviews where you had a little bit, you've remembered a little bit, you've got a traumatic event, and memory is not like a videotape. You don't play your memory each time and get identical statements out of your mouth like you would playing a videotape. No, memory is a funny thing. Memory is reconstructed based on facts, based on inferences, and you can remember stuff after that you didn't remember originally, especially when you're in trauma. Did a whole live stream on trauma ages ago. I don't even know what it was called, but I don't even know how to tell you to find it. But it's there. It's there in the Idaho 4 playlist. If you find it, great. Go and watch it. All right. So, where were we? I'll start here. Defendant claims that law enforcement failed to inform the magistrate that DM's accounts describing the suspect were variable, that she questioned her memory, and that she did not recognize defendant when provided with a photo of him after his arrest. Defendant also contends that law enforcement misrepresented statements made by DM that would have demonstrated her unreliability. These alleged false statements and omissions, according to defendant, were exculpatory and material. Okay. While defendant's challenge may be fodder for cross-examination, yeah, cross-examine her. They're going to call her as a witness at the trial, cross-examine her. Make her, make all your points to the jury. Pull out the inconsistencies in front of the jury. But it doesn't mean that you can throw out a search warrant because law enforcement officials use DM as a witness. Ridiculous. Defendant's own proffer establishes that DM's accounts were remarkably consistent throughout her multiple interviews with law enforcement. And further, the probable cause affidavits are very consistent with her accounts. Second, DM's interview statements that her memory was fuzzy and dreamlike and may have been affected by being tired or under the influence of alcohol do not call into question her reliability to the extent that Franks would require disclosure. Finally, DM's failure to recognize the photo of defendant is of no consequence given that the intruder she saw was masked. Dear God, save me from this minutiae of nonsense. All right. Okay. Of course, the memory. Look, she's honest. My memory's fuzzy. I can't remember. It was like being in a dream. Well, was it because she was drunk? Was it because she was in trauma? Was it because she woke up in the morning and didn't realize what she saw was actual fact? And it was only when the full horror became apparent that she realized that, yeah, the guy I saw wasn't a dream. It was actual fact. Probably, yeah. I mean, look, 4 of her friends were brutally murdered. She was in the house when it happened. She saw the offender, the bushy eyebrow man. Of course she's going to be in trauma. Of course she's not going to know which way is up. Of course, she's going to make statements in one interview that maybe she didn't mention in another interview, because memory is not a videotape. Dear me. All right. 1. DM's accounts were consistent and accurately summarized by Exhibit A. The draft Exhibit A circulated by law enforcement included the following description of statements DM made during her interviews with law enforcement. So, DM made statements during interviews that indicated the occupants of the King Road residence were at home by 2 a.m. and reportedly asleep by approximately 4 a.m. This is with the exception of Zana Knodel, who received a DoorDash order at the residence at approximately 4 a.m. DM stated she was awoken at approximately 4 a.m. by what she stated sounds like Kaylee Gonzalez playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, which was located on the 3rd floor. A short time later, DM said she heard what she thought was Kaylee say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." A review of forensic records associated with a download of Xana's cellular phone indicates she was likely awake and using TikTok at approximately 4:12 a.m. So all that's consistent so far. DM stated that she looked out of her bedroom but did not see anything when she heard the comment about somebody being in the house. DM stated she opened her door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Xana's room. DM then said she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." At approximately 4:17 a.m., a camera at 1122 King Road, so it's outside. 1112 King Road. So it's the one, so you go out the door of 1122. I think it's the one to the left. That's 1112. Picked up audio of what sounded like a struggle coming off camera. The security camera is less than 50 feet from Xana's bedroom wall. The struggle lasted less than 1 minute, and unintelligible sounds can be heard on the camera. DM stated she opened her door for the 3rd time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and mask covering the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. DM described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past DM as she stood in a frozen shock phase. As the male walked towards the backsliding door, DM locked herself in her room after seeing the male. So all of that will be familiar to you, right? Probable cause affidavit has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb by many creators, not just me. Many people have read this. They've read this into the record on their own channels. They've picked it apart sentence by sentence. So all of that is consistent, comes from the probable cause affidavit. All right. So we now come to what the defense believes is inconsistent. This portion of draft Exhibit A was incorporated in various degrees into Blaker's Exhibit A, Payne's Exhibit A, and Murray's Exhibit A. When these Exhibit A's were submitted in support of search warrant applications, DM had sat for at least 3 interviews with law enforcement, 2 on November 13th, one with Officer Nunes, and later with Officer Murray, and 1 on November 17th with Detective Gooch. Her description of the intruder was notably similar during all 3 interviews. Look at how detailed Judge Hitler's been here. Look at how detailed he's been. I mean, the information we're getting from this is pretty impressive. Michelle doesn't feel the way Bubbly Waters and Embry do. I don't even know who those people are. Salty Sleuth, I'm going to tell you. I don't even know who those people are. I'm reading this, talking about what the judge thinks. I'm giving my opinion on it. I don't even know what anybody else has said. I think, honestly, the only people I've watched in relation to the release of these documents is Lawyer You Know. I watched that. He brought some bits out, like some selected paragraphs to discuss. And there was one other person. I don't remember who else I watched who discussed this. Can't remember. But I've not seen anybody else's coverage of this at all. And it's taken me a couple of days to get to this because of other cases. So I do appreciate this is not breaking news or anything like that. There's plenty of other people who've covered it. I'm just giving my opinion on it. That's all. All right. So 3 interviews. Her description of the intruder was notably similar during all 3 interviews. 1, white male. 2, slim, skinny, lean body type. 3, slightly taller than DM, 5'10", wearing all black because she is tall. DM is tall, so she said he's at least 5'10". He's taller than me. Wearing all black, wearing a mask that was covering his forehead and mouth. A voice she didn't recognise, saying he was here to help. And 7, the intruder walked out towards the back sliding doors without saying anything to her. While she did not tell Officer Nunes that she noticed the intruder carrying a vacuum-type object in his hand. What on earth is that? A vacuum-type object? So, what, like a vacuum cleaner? I can't get my head into what that actually would look like. So she conveyed that information to Detective Mowry later that day, as well as Detective Gooch. So the first interview, she didn't mention the vacuum type object, maybe because it wasn't something that immediately came to mind, right, the first interview. But then, as you replay the events, you've talked about it once, you replay it again, and you start remembering details. That's how memory works. You start remembering details. A dirt devil. Oh, yeah. Those little handheld things. So it took a dirt devil. It took a dirt devil to clean up after himself. That's insane. That's insane. And then he's stupid enough to leave the knife sheath. No way. No way. He thought he'd like, listen, don't let this dude out. Do not let this dude out, because I guarantee he'll do it again. I guarantee you. You got to go all the way back to before we even knew who Bryan Kohberger was when I did my profile. Do you remember? Which was remarkably similar to the stuff we learned after Kohberger was arrested. And one thing I absolutely will stand by is that this guy will do it again. If he's not caught, he'll do it again. So don't let him out. Yeah, didn't realise the sheath came off. Yeah. I think so. I mean, was he just holding the sheath? Did he walk in with the knife or did he have the sheath like on a belt or something, or in his pocket, and he just pulled the knife out and dropped the sheath? Just forgot it. Just forgot it. Oh no. All right. She also told Detective Gooch that she remembered the suspect's eyebrows were bushy, but could not remember their colour. DM likewise told Detective Mowry she could not remember the colour of his eyebrows. More importantly, not only are DM's statements consistent with each other with regard to the intruder's description, they are accurately included by law enforcement in Exhibit A set forth above. So DM's statements are consistent across the 3 interviews, and law enforcement's words as to what DM said are also accurate based on what DM said. So what's the problem here? What's the problem here? There's not one statement in the affidavit regarding the intruder that cannot be traced directly to DM's words. Consequently, defendant has not demonstrated an intentional or reckless false statement or omission of a material exculpatory fact with regard to law enforcement's recounting of DM's description of the suspect. I'd like to know about this dirt devil. I need to know. I need to know. I need to know. What happened to the dirt devil? Other brands of handheld vacuum are available. Not sponsored by Dirt Devil. Are they consistent when He was her height. Yes. She said 5'10" or taller. She didn't say in one interview he was 5'2", and then in another interview that he was 7'4". She said her height or taller. It's probably a knife, but I think it was a dark kind of knife. Yeah, but those K-bar knives, they're not big. They're not big and bulky. You know, that put a K-bar knife next to a handheld vacuum, you're going to be able to tell the difference. I don't know. The memory does a strange thing. Memory does weird things. That maybe in her mind she saw a vacuum. Actually, it was the knife. It's the brain does strange things when you're under stress. When they're under stress. All right. Defendant also exerts that Exhibit A watered down DM's statements about hearing Kaylee Gonzalez around the time of the homicides. According to defendant, DM was unequivocal in her 3 interviews when she reported at approximately 4 a.m. she heard Miss Gonzalez walk upstairs with her dog before running back down the stairs saying someone's here. In draft Exhibit A, however, law enforcement represented that DM said she heard what she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of, "There's someone here," which is the same. It's the same. In draft Exhibit A, however, law enforcement represented DM said she heard what she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Defendant argues the addition of the word thought is false. Oh no, they added a word. No, throw it all out. Throw everything out for adding the word thought. Oh no. And further, defendant surmises it was intentionally false to cover up the fact DM was wrong about what she heard. How do we know she was wrong about what she heard? Maybe she heard the killer running upstairs. So she heard Kaylee upstairs. Remember, DM's bedroom is on the 2nd floor, and Kaylee and Maddie's bedroom was on the 3rd floor. So maybe she heard Kaylee saying someone's here, and instead of Kaylee running up the stairs as she thought, because she's not going to think, "Oh, it's a killer come to kill everybody," is she? She's going to be thinking it's Kaylee running up the stairs saying someone's here. Well, actually, maybe it was the killer running upstairs, and at the same time, Kaylee saying someone here. And then it's not inconsistent, is it? How is it? How is it? We weren't there, and Taylor wasn't there. We are relying on what DM heard and saw for this witness account. But it doesn't change the fact, even if DM is wrong, that it wasn't Kaylee running up and downstairs, it doesn't change the material facts that somebody who left their knife sheath there that just happened to have Bryan's DNA on it was in that house and murdered 4 people. Doesn't change any material facts whatsoever if DM was wrong about who ran upstairs. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Oh yeah, Bryan Kohberger did like to vacuum at 4 o'clock in the morning. His neighbours have said that he'd be up in the night vacuuming. Well, my neighbours don't need to worry about me vacuuming at 4 in the morning or at 4 in the afternoon, come to that. Because I rarely do it. That's why I always have allergies, because of dust. I do it occasionally. All right. I do it every now and again. Okay. All right. But Kohberger's a clean freak. So it does make sense that he's walking about with a held vacuum. He's a clean freak. All right. All right. However, the statement challenged by defendant can be read in 2 ways. One, that DM said, "I think it was Kaylee," which is how defendant apparently reads it, and which he claims is inconsistent with DM's interview statements. Or 2, that DM said she heard Kaylee, but law enforcement had reason to think it could have been someone else. And again, it doesn't change anything material. Whichever one it is, it doesn't change. When the statement is viewed in context, the latter makes more sense. In their respective Exhibit A's, Detective Payne and Sergeant Blaker immediately followed up the challenge statement with the following. A review of records obtained from a forensic download of Xana's phone showed this could have been Xana, as her cellular phone indicated she was likely awake and using the TikTok app at approximately 4:12. So yeah, it could have been Xana who said there's someone here. So Kaylee could have been completely asleep. And what DM heard was the killer going upstairs. And it wasn't Kaylee saying there's someone here, it was Xana. So in her state of mind, you know, DM's trying to remember, she's trying to recount these things, and she thought it was Kaylee. Actually, Kaylee's asleep. It was Xana who said there's someone here, and it was the killer who was running upstairs. It wasn't Kaylee at all. And the dog would have been greeting the killer. Presumably, this dog is not the type that's going to guard them. I don't know. Maybe the dog put up a fuss. I don't know. What breed was he? He was like a golden doodle, wasn't he? He was only a puppy, though. And he was used to a lot of different people being in the house. So, you know, as a puppy, as somebody who was used to a lot of different people in the house, he's not going to have really perceived much of a threat. So maybe he greeted the killer. Thinking it was just another one of his friends. And, you know, you got a dog maybe with guarding ability, maybe it would have been different. Then again, the dog may have ended up getting stabbed, you know. But, you know, if let's say Murphy wasn't a golden doodle, he was let's say a Rottweiler or a shepherd of some kind, and he's met by, let's say, a snarling shepherd at the top of the stairs. What's he going to do? Stab the shepherd, or is he going to turn tail and run? Don't know. I don't know. All right. Okay, where were we? All right, okay. Through the explanation, Payne and Blaker effectively conferred to the magistrate they believed DM's statement of what she heard was questionable. Thus, the court cannot conclude there was anything false or misleading in this regard. In addition, even assuming it was a false statement, defendant has not established that it was intentional or reckless attempt to hide DM's alleged misrepresentation, or that her actual statement was exculpatory or otherwise material to probable cause. Exactly. A rot or a shepherd with me on guard and barking, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Cassie would have them. Cassie hates people coming in the house. Cassie would not allow someone in the house. Tilly and Noodle, though. Because they're doodles, you see. They're friendly. Yeah, Tilly has got a side that she's, you know, don't mess with her. But people, she doesn't see as a threat at all. Other dogs, if another dog came in the house, she'd have a problem with it until she, you know, she got used to it. But a person, she'd be fine with. Cassie, no. Cassie would not allow it. Not allow it. All right, so we know that this is not a problem. Consequently, a Frank's hearing is not warranted with regard to statements in the relevant Exhibit A's regarding DM's account of what she actually heard or saw. 2, there's no evidence law enforcement intentionally or recklessly omitted information bearing on DM's credibility or that such omissions were material to probable cause. Defendant next asserts that the probable cause statement submitted important information. I used to have a collie cross German Shepherd, and she was the best weapon on God's green earth. She was amazing. She was 3 parts Border Collie, 1 part German Shepherd. Her mother was a sheepdog, like a working sheepdog, and her dad was a collie cross German Shepherd, and she was amazing, absolutely amazing. She'd have taken Bryan Kohberger chewed him up and spat him out. Incredible dog. All right, I digress. Defendant next observes that the probable cause statements omitted important information bearing on DM's credibility or reliability. Defendant notes that DM qualifies her statements. Oh, God, my brain's gone. We're only on page 15. All right. Oh, what are we? Page 13. Oh, dear. All right. Defendant notes that DM qualified her interview statements on several occasions by questioning her memory of the event. For example, she told Detective Mowry, everything was kind of blurry, like I don't fully remember it, I would say. A few days later, when recounting the events to Detective Gooch, DM states, again, I believe I was also very drunk. I don't know how much of this is real. So she's admitting she doesn't know. She's admitting that some things, could be untrue because she was drunk or she felt like she was dreaming it. She was in trauma. She's in shock. So she's proper honest. She's not trying to say things as fact. She said, I don't remember. I don't know. I don't know what's real and what isn't. She's recounting what she remembers, but she doesn't know if it's real. She's being honest, and people are dragging her all over the internet for all this. So unfair. Like, I don't know if my mind was like doing whatever. I don't know any of it. Like, half of this stuff, I don't know if it's a dream or if it's real. I just have no clue. She also said her memory was fuzzy and cloudy, and she could not differentiate if anything is real or anything is a dream. This information was not included in Exhibit A. According to defendant, this information was crucial to allow the magistrate to properly evaluate DM's reliability, and its omission is a material and exculpatory. But even if they'd put it in, would that have changed the probable cause? Whether it's in or it's out, would it have changed the magistrate signing a probable cause affidavit? Just that statement alone, including that everything's fuzzy and she doesn't remember, whether certain things are real or not. Would that have changed the magistrate as to, the probable cause statement being signed? No, is the answer. The law does not favour defendant in this argument. Probable cause is determined by examining the totality of the circumstances and making practical common sense decisions whether, given all the circumstances set forth in the affidavit before the court, including the veracity and basis of knowledge of persons supplying hearsay information, there is a fair probability that contraband or evidence of a crime will be found in a particular place. Based on defendant's proffer, it is not a foregone fact that DM was mistaken when she heard Miss Gonzalez, or she thought she heard Miss Gonzalez. DM reported it was approximately 4 a.m., which is exactly the time when the killer came in. She knows the time approximately. Someone's here, Miss Canodal received a DoorDash delivery at the residence at 4. So it's entirely possible Miss Gonzalez ran downstairs when she heard the delivery person and then went back to bed. It is absolutely possible. It could be Curly shouting to Xana, there's someone here. And actually, meaning the DoorDash. So absolutely. We'll never know, will we? We'll never know. We'll never know whether Kaylee came downstairs or whether it was the killer running upstairs, whether it was Xana who said there's someone here, whether it was Kaylee who said there's someone here. It does not matter. It does not change the material facts that 4 people were brutally murdered in this house and the defendant is on trial for it. It doesn't change any material facts that would have altered the magistrate signing the probable cause documents or those search warrants. Doesn't change it. Whether the hearsay supplier is reliable, dependent in part on their status. Whether the hearsay supplier is reliable is dependent in part on their status. Unlike an informer from the criminal milieu, crime victims or witnesses are presumed reliable and may be relied upon without independent corroboration. A detailed eyewitness report of a crime is self-corroborating. It supplies its own indicia. He's using words I don't know. Indicia of reliability. But remember, we know from loads of psychology studies that eyewitness accounts, even though the jury love them, they're rarely reliable. They're rarely accurate. Because memory is not a videotape. because when people are in shock, when something's highly unusual, highly traumatic, their mind plays tricks on them. Eyewitness accounts are not noticeably unreliable. Some people are great. They remember everything, but some people don't remember anything. And there could be two people who witness the same traumatic event who remember it very differently. Neither of them are lying. Both of them are telling what they recall seeing, but they're very different because each person's memory has played tricks on them. Study after study after study. All right. Despite this presumed reliability, police must always be alert whether other facts which have come to their attention raise doubts about the veracity of the witness, because memory is not a videotape. Such facts might include a motive to exaggerate or falsify statements made to law enforcement, or when the hearsay supplier is a young child or suffers from a psychological delusion. In such circumstances, corroboration is required to establish reliability. However, this is not a burdensome requirement. The corroboration of even innocent minor details can support a finding of probable cause. United States versus Stevens, 2008. Any omission of facts bearing on an individual's reliability will only be considered misleading under Franks if the omitted facts cast doubt on probable cause. These facts alone, given the totality of the other stuff that provides probable cause for search warrants to be written for Bryan Kohberger's stuff, it doesn't negate any of that. It doesn't. Misrepresentation or omission that could impact the credibility assessment of a witness do not trigger a Franks hearing, where probable cause is nevertheless established through other evidence. And there's a wealth of it in this instance. So we've got Wesley versus Campbell, no probable cause based on uncorroborated sexual abuse claimed by a 7-year-old who had a history of psychological problems, or not relevant. State versus Peterson, although the officer failed to include in search warrant affidavit that juvenile informant had lied to officers in the past and was expecting favourable treatment in return for providing information to police. No Franks violation, because these omissions were not of sufficient magnitude to compel. And there you go. So even in cases where a witness lied, it does not necessarily negate probable cause, because there's other things that can show probable cause. There's a whole bunch of stuff. All right, none of DM's qualifications during her interviews reasonably placed her presumed reliability in disrepute. Like, she said she didn't remember certain things. She said she wasn't sure that things were real. And she was, in the main, consistent across 3 different interviews. Even though she's confused, she's traumatized. All right, especially as to the facts relied on in the search warrant affidavits, despite the fact she claimed her memory was fuzzy and that she felt like it was a dream or that she was still intoxicated. Further, even if her reliability were in question, there's other evidence, including Exhibit A, that corroborates her account. For example, the security camera from 1112 King Road picked up audio of a struggle or something at 4:17, which coincides with when DM states she thought was crying coming from Miss Canodle's room, and a male voice speaking. It was shortly after this she opened the door for a 3rd time and saw the suspect walk by her towards the sliding glass door, which corresponds with the surveillance video showing the suspect's vehicle leaving 1122 King Road at approximately 4:20. In addition, law enforcement corroborated DM's description of defendant through his vehicle identification efforts, which led investigators to defendant's driver license information. Exhibit A's note that defendant's physical description is consistent with DM's account. So, tall, skinny, arguably about the bushy eyebrows. Maybe if somebody, I don't think Bryan Kohberger's got especially bushy eyebrows, but he does have quite a prominent brow. So in the dark, where everything else is masked, like his forehead, his lower face is masked. Maybe the brow that she sees as all as eyebrows. Again, it's dark. Her memory is fuzzy. She doesn't really understand what she's seeing. It's not a videotape, it's memory. Defendant has shown no objective indication that DM's interview statements were unreliable, particularly given the other corroborating evidence, and therefore no reason for law enforcement to include her qualifications in the affidavit. For this reason, it cannot be that law enforcement intentionally or recklessly omitted the information. Further, the Exhibit A's inferred that DM was traumatized when they noted that she stood in a frozen shock phase when she saw the intruder. This necessarily alerted the magistrate that DM's memories were coloured by trauma and shock, which goes to the issue of her reliability that defendant targets in this motion. Finally, in this issue, even had the Exhibit A's included DM's qualifications to her memory, it would not have significantly undermined her credibility and would not have negated probable cause. It would have been no surprise to the magistrate that a person experiencing what DM must have experienced would be shaken by what happened. It's common sense. You don't need to be a psychologist to know this. And would have questioned the reliability of what she perceived. This does not render her unreliable. And additionally, the bulk of probable cause came from other sources, including the extensive vehicle identification efforts. Thus, even if the magistrate questioned the reliability of DM's account, she had sufficient grounds through other evidence to issue the warrants. In sum, defendant has not shown that DM's various qualifications to her memory are material exculpatory facts that were intentionally or recklessly omitted that would have affected probable cause. It is evident that the applicable Exhibit A's that DM's account was largely relied upon to establish the timing of the homicides and a general description of the perpetrator, not to identify defendant specifically. Her statements on these matters were consistent. Whether any perceived weakness in her memory while any perceived weaknesses in her memory may be fodder for cross-examination, they do not negate probable cause. Consequently, a Frank's hearing is not warranted for this issue. All right, number 3, DM's non-recognition of defendant is immaterial. He's wearing a mask. This is obvious. Defendant also contends that law enforcement's failure to include DM's non-recognition of defendant in Exhibit A warrants a Frank's hearing. During her December 30th, 2022 interview with law enforcement, DM was shown defendant's mugshot and asked by Detective Lake whether defendant was the person she saw in her house. She said, "I have no clue. From what I remember, I just remember seeing this figure that was more of a like skinnier tone build and some mask on. I don't know if it's covering his mouth, his nose, or below his mouth and nose. I just remember he was white. I didn't know how he was white. I just knew he was. I knew he looked at me because of the bushy eyebrows." So again, he has quite a prominent brow. So, you know, the eyebrows may have stood out based on everything else being dark and just seeing, you know, his eyes. However, the fact DM could not identify defendant is hardly exculpatory or material. I'd be more concerned if she said, yes, that's definitely him, based on the previous things she said about not really knowing because she, you know, he had a mask on, so she couldn't see his entire face. If she then came along and said, yes, that's definitely him, I'd have more of a problem with that. I'd consider her reliability more in question if she then solidly said, yes, it was him, given that he was wearing a mask. However, the fact DM cannot identify defendant is hardly exculpatory material to probable cause. Holding that omission of non-identification from photo spread is not material, and that the Fourth Amendment does not require an affiant to include all potential exculpatory evidence in the affidavit. Her interview statements consistent described a black-clad masked person who was not someone she thought she knew or could identify. Her inability to recognize defendant unmasked is expected, particularly where her description is relayed in the Exhibit A describes a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose. Thus, because her non-recognition is not material and exculpatory, defendant cannot demonstrate the failure to include this fact in probable cause affidavit warrants a Frank's hearing. Defendant has not demonstrated law enforcement omitted it intentionally or recklessly, nor as is shown how including the information would have affected probable cause. One simply cannot say that had law enforcement included a statement that DM, unsurprisingly, was unable to recognise defendant from a photo, the magistrate would not have found probable cause. Frank's hearing is not warranted. Go away. Go away. Is there any gag on this trial? Yeah. So the parties can't speak, the attorneys can't speak. So there's a gag order to some of the parties speaking. So we're hearing information from the judge himself here that we didn't previously know. It's interesting. It's interesting. So the attorneys can't speak to the media. It's questionable whether the families can speak to the media. Supposedly they can't, but then sometimes they do. I don't know how they can gag families. I've never agreed with that, but anyhow. Defendant has not met Frank's burden on issue 4, vehicle identification. Can Bryan speak? He'd be strongly advised not to by his defence. Can Bryan do an interview with the media? I would imagine that would be covered by the gag order. If the parties are gagged, I would imagine that Bryan counts as a party. Can we poll chat to see how many think he's innocent? Yeah, we can. One moment. I'll have to sign into YouTube. You can't do a poll on StreamYard. Okay. Thank you, Berju, for the $4.99. Can't wait to see Kohberger and Allen get the treatment Darrell Brooks got. Ouch. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, $4.99. Thank you very much. All right, so ask a question. All right. Do you think Bryan Kohberger is guilty, innocent? All right, so this is just based on what we know so far, and guilty or innocent. Obviously, constitutionally, legally, he is innocent till proven guilty in a court of law. We're talking about factual guilt and factual innocent here. So here's the poll. Do you think Bryan Kohberger is guilty or innocent? So we'll let that run for a little while. Okay. You can't have undecided. You have to be decisive here. You have to be decisive. All right, so this is about vehicle identification. In issue 4, defendant takes issue with Exhibit A insofar as it describes the suspect vehicle captured through various surveillance cameras. It states, law enforcement officers provided video footage of suspect vehicle 1 to vehicle specialists with the FBI that regularly utilize surveillance footage to identify the year, make, and model of an unknown vehicle that is observed by one or more cameras during the commission of a criminal offence. After reviewing the numerous observances of suspect vehicle 1, the vehicle specialists initially believed the suspect vehicle was a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra. Upon further review, they indicated it could be a 2011 to 2016 Elantra. Okay. Defendant claims there are two material and exculpatory omissions in this paragraph. First, he asserts that law enforcement should have disclosed the FBI's vehicle specialist felt more comfortable with the 2011 and 13 date range for the suspect vehicle. Second, he asserts that the specialist opinion expanding the date range was predicated on the erroneous use of a video taken from Ridge Road, which law enforcement knew or should have known was not the suspect vehicle. And actually, listening to the argumentation regarding the vehicle identification stuff, I found more compelling than the other stuff that they discussed. On its own, though, it doesn't materially change whether or not a magistrate would have signed probable cause because of the totality of the evidence. But I did find the arguments that they made about vehicle identification better than basically their other arguments. This chair creaks really badly. It needs WD-40 on it. Can you hear it creaking? Is that coming on the mic? So creaky. All right. Which law enforcement unit should have known was not the suspect vehicle. Defendant also faults the officers for failing to provide the magistrate with the footage reviewed by the specialist, which, according to defendant, would have demonstrated to the magistrate that a vehicle identification could not have been reasonably made. The court finds defendant's challenges are unsupported by his proffer and do not warrant a Franks hearing. The FBI specialist may have been more comfortable with a narrower date range than represented in Exhibit A is unsupported and immaterial. Again, it's about whether it materially changes the entire probable cause. You've got to look at the totality of stuff. Defendants claim that the FBI vehicle specialist felt more comfortable setting the year range at 2011 to 13, and law enforcement knew their specialist was of that opinion. The car was certainly between 2011 and 13 is based on an email chain between that specialist, Agent Anthony Immel, and another FBI agent about their investigation. Similar statements made in Blaker Mawery also. Okay. However, the email chain does not support his argument. What the email chain shows is that on November 26th, Agent Immel directed the FBI to open up their search to 2011 to 2016. In doing so, he discussed the changes to the Elantra in 2014 and 17 and states that he wanted a better shot of the vehicle's front fog lights and rear reflectors. He further adds, rather not leave anything out, rather safe than sorry. 5 minutes later, he sent another email stating, yeah, I see the change in 2014, and I'm not really a fan of the 2014, much prefer the 2011 to 13, but wanted to lay that out. Have a good night. Okay, we'll keep looking and send any new info I can come up with. These emails demonstrate that it was Agent Immel's decision to open up the date range to 2011 to 16, despite his preference for 11 to 13. Exhibit A accurately captures this decision by stating that the specialist initially believed it was 11 to 13, but opened it up to 11 to 16 upon further review. While Exhibit A did not call out that Agent Immel preferred a narrower time frame, defendant has not shown this omission to be exculpatory and material. What are you going to ask me? Ask Michelle, she would know. What is it that you're asking me? I can't find a comment. Why is it not moving? Oh, I hate this flaming mouse. Mouse pad is annoying. I don't know what question I would know the answer to, I'm afraid. How are we doing with guilty and innocent? We got 91 votes. We've got 76% guilty so far, 23%, 77-23 it's moved to, 95 votes. I still can't see what question. Anyhow, okay. Probable cause is not an exact science and does not require that law enforcement establish with absolute certainty. Like, it's like the defense has forgotten that probable cause does not have the same standard as absolute certainty or beyond a reasonable doubt. It's probable cause. There is probable cause, not definite or certain cause, just probable cause that this crime has been committed by this person that we want search warrants for. It's probable, not exact, not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a different standard. Is the judge really called Hitler? No, Hitler. Hitler. So P, not T. Hitler. All right. Okay. Simply because Agent Immel may have felt more comfortable with earlier years within the range he provides does not mean he felt uncomfortable with the later years. Thus, it's highly unlikely the magistrate would have disregarded the specialist identification of the larger date range or otherwise declined to find probable cause simply because Agent Immel preferred the narrower range. That fact in alone did not materially change whether or not the magistrate would have signed the search warrants. Further, there is no evidence the information was intentionally or recklessly omitted. Thus, a frank suing is not warranted. Defendant infers that it was intentionally or recklessly omitted by pointing out that one of the earlier search warrant affidavits, be on the lookout bulletin, indicates the suspect vehicle is 1113. Posits it was only after he was identified through IGG that the date range of the Hyundai was opened up to include the model year of defendant's Elantra. However, the court is not willing to accept defendant's inference. Discrepancies between those documents and the later Exhibit A's challenged by defendant merely reflects that there was an initial belief that the suspect vehicle was 11-13 and was subsequently revised. Okay. All right, defendant has not demonstrated a false representation or omission with regard to identification of the suspect vehicle. Defendant next challenged Exhibit A on grounds that the FBI vehicle specialist identification of suspect vehicle 1 as a 2011-16 Hyundai Elantra was based on video footage from Ridge Road that law enforcement knew or should have known was not suspect vehicle 1. Defendant states that he knows law enforcement based its identification of the vehicle on Ridge Road footage because we have the emails from the FBI specialist, which explains on November 23rd, 2022, that their team is mainly looking at the window configuration, something that these other images do not. But later that day, an FBI agent sends them images from the video, calling it a great one. However, defendant's proffer does not show the FBI specialist identification was, in fact, made on that Ridge Road footage. The FBI emails defendant contends support his position contains no mention of Ridge Road footage, no mention that the FBI was mainly looking at the window configuration. Defendant exerts that the email stating got a great one attached images from the Ridge Road footage, but there's nothing in the proffer establishing that images were in fact attached, and importantly, what those images were. So it's not like, he's got a great one. Here's one here on Ridge Road, but they didn't include that in the probable cause affidavit. So it's irrelevant to the search warrant signing. The fact that there was an email exchange where one vehicle from Ridge Road was highlighted, it doesn't mean that that was used in the probable cause affidavit that allowed the magistrate to sign the search warrant. So there was no mention of Ridge Road. There was no mention of particular footage at all. Honestly. Counsel again refers to the FBI emails and unlabeled screenshots reproduced on page 17 of defendant's amended memorandum and defendant claims were from Ridge Road. This is insufficient to establish beyond speculation that Ridge Road footage was the basis of the identification. Even assuming it were, however, defendant has still failed to carry out his burden under Franks. Because the vehicle identification came from the FBI, which was disclosed to the magistrate in Exhibit A's, there is a presumption of reliability. Defendant's lack of citations to the record was the reason the court required defendant to submit an amended Franks. Okay. All right. Observations of fellow officers from the government engaged in a common investigation was plainly a reliable basis for a warrant. Thus, at a minimum, defendant must establish that the search warrant affiants knew the FBI specialist's identification was based on incorrect footage, yet intentionally or recklessly relied on it anyway to obtain warrants. There's no evidence to this end. Assuming the Ridge Road footage was in fact not suspect vehicle 1, the affiants were not part of the FBI email chain, which allegedly, so even the affiants didn't even see this. The affiants didn't even see these emails, so how could they have used it in the probable cause to get those search warrants? Ridiculous. All right, oh dear me. Further, there's no evidence law enforcement provided the Ridge Road footage to the FBI for identification purposes, knowing it was not suspect vehicle 1. Consequently, a Franks hearing is not warranted. So, assuming the Ridge Road footage was in fact not a suspect vehicle 1, the affiants were not part of the FBI email chain, which allegedly evidence uses. Dear me. All right. Defendant has not met his Franks burden on issue 5, misleading timeline. Ooh, misleading timeline. I love a good timeline. You know me. I love a good timeline. I love it. In issue 5, defendant claims that law enforcement created a false narrative of their investigative timeline in Exhibit A, and so makes it appear that defendant was identified through their investigative efforts and not, in fact, through IGG, investigative genetic genealogy. In other words, he argues that law enforcement, having already identified defendant through IGG, tailored their Exhibit A to support probable cause for an already identified suspect, not an unknown suspect. Defendant provides 2 examples of what he contends are misleading timelines about his identification, but these examples fall far short of the Franks standard. Oh no. First, defendant notes that in Payne's Exhibit A, defendant Payne states that on November 29th, officers from Washington State University queried why alumni Elantras registered at the school and pulled up a 2015 white Elantra with Pennsylvania plates that was registered to defendant. The same day, Detective Payne states another WSU officer was patrolling the area by defendant's apartment and located a 2015 white Elantra with Washington plates. With Washington plates? It was Pennsylvania plates, not Washington plates. Okay, I'm confused. Anyway, he ran the plates and returned to defendant. Defendant points out that Detective Payne was not even aware of the WSU officer's finding in this regard until December 20th, after defendant was already identified by IGG. However, he contends Payne's Exhibit A makes it appear that defendant was identified in part through the WSU queries. Brett Payne is Moscow Police Department. Okay. Second, defendant takes issue with Detective Payne's focus on suspect vehicle 1's lack of front license plate. In Payne's Exhibit A, he discusses his review of surveillance footage, noting a review of camera footage indicated a white sedan, hereafter suspect vehicle 1, was observed traveling westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 in Moscow at approximately 3:28 a.m. On this video, it appeared suspect vehicle 1 was not displaying a front license plate. Mandy's been a member for 27 months. You're really an old girl now, you are. You're a big OG. Big OG now. Detective Payne later points out that defendant registered his 2015 white Elantra with Washington State University on November 18th, 2022. He notes that previously the vehicle was registered to Pennsylvania. Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense as to why we've got Pennsylvania and Washington cited in the paragraph above. Okay. Unlike Idaho and Washington, does not require a front license plate to be displayed. Defendant contends that although Exhibit A makes it appear law enforcement focused on the lack of a front license plate early on, it was not until after he was identified through IGG that it became an object of inquiry. In neither example has defendant established that Detective Payne's investigative timeline to be misleading or false, much less intentionally or recklessly so. There could be no question that defendant was identified in part through the WSU officer's queries and through the suspect vehicle's lack of a front license plate, as observed in surveillance videos from the night of the murders. The fact that law enforcement had additional DNA evidence tying defendant to the crime does not render it improper for law enforcement to rely on independent evidence accomplishing the same, which is what I've been saying all along. The months when this IGG stuff was running on and on and on, and people were saying, oh, throw the IG out and they'll free Kohberger. No, because that was just a tip. The IGG is irrelevant. The IGG is not even mentioned in the PCA. And even if they used IGG in part to identify him, doesn't mean to say it negates everything else that they did to identify him. I think they'd have come to him regardless through his vehicle, through his registration at WSU. They didn't need IGG. The fact that they had IGG is great, but they didn't need it. So even if you throw the IGG out, it still does not mean that the probable cause affidavit and everything that came from it needs to be thrown out. Sorry. Okay. Defendant has not established there is anything wrong with this approach. So that's Taylor. Observing that requirements under Franks that search warrant affidavits be truthful and complete does not require that every fact recited herein must be correct or that every detail of investigation be provided. No, they don't need to include every single thing that they investigate. It's just enough to establish probable cause. They can leave stuff out if they want. Indeed, what is important to probable cause is the totality of the evidence, as I've been saying all along. Thank you, Judge Hippler. Once all gathered and examined in light of what that collection of evidence shows, not looking at it in isolation as each piece of evidence was separately gathered. Moreover, had law enforcement indicated in Exhibit A that the WSU query and lack of a front license plate only came across its radar after defendant had been identified through IGG, defendant has not explained how this would have eroded probable cause. Indeed, as discussed below, including IGG evidence would have created more, not less, probable cause. Exactly. Supporting the search warrants. Consequently, a Franks hearing is not warranted. Defendant has not met his Franks burden on issue 6, dog barking. Oh, God, whether the dog barked or not. This was ridiculous. I was sitting there listening to this nonsense thinking, oh, please shut up. This is ridiculous. This was the point. This was the point where I thought, nah, this is just pedantic. This is nitpicking. This is not a good look. I'm sorry, this is not a good look for Bryan Kohberger's defense. In this issue, defendant challenges omissions pertaining to the barking dog referenced in the Payne Exhibit A. It states on 4:17 a.m. a security camera located at a nearby residence on King Road picked up distorted audio of what sounds like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. A dog can be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. The only other information in the Payne Exhibit A pertaining to a dog refers to the fact that Kaylee Gonzalez's dog Murphy was found in her bedroom by first responders. Defendant contends that Detective Payne failed to include 3 allegedly important pieces of information pertaining to the dog. One, that the dog heard on security camera continued to bark for 30 minutes after the suspect left. Well, maybe he was trying to wake his people up. Maybe he was confused. Maybe it wasn't even Murphy barking. Maybe it was another dog barking that was picked up by that camera. Maybe it was a different dog. How do we know that it was Murphy's barking that was picked up on that camera? We don't know. But even if it was Murphy, so what if he barked for half an hour? He's found his people murdered. Dogs understand death. You know, Murphy's let this guy in thinking, oh, this is a friend. And then he's been brutally betrayed. Now he's barking, thinking, shit, wake up. Wake up, my dead dudes. Wake up. What am I going to do? He's panicking. He's panicking now. He's only a puppy. He's panicking. But maybe it's not Murphy at all. Maybe it's a different dog barking. Dear God. You could probably hear Tilly barking once she starts. Her barking is so loud. She's got such a loud bark. You could hear Tilly barking in Idaho from here. I bet you could. I bet you could. Anyhow. All right. Detective Payne conducted a test to determine that the dog was likely outside while barking. So it was a different dog. It was a different dog. And 3, that Murphy was found without any blood on him, even though the bedroom doors were open where the decedents were found. Well, what are they trying to claim here? Well, Murphy wasn't hit. No, Murphy wasn't hit. He wasn't beaten. He wasn't stabbed. So why would Murphy have blood on him? If he was scared, if he went in the other room and was scared, he wouldn't have blood on him, would he? According to defendant, this omitted information would have revealed that whoever was in their house brought the dog back inside after the suspect vehicle left. Seriously, this is ridiculous. Ridiculous. I thought this was insane. This was a really bad argument. This was wild. This was too far. This was too much. Murphy could have hidden, yeah. So he's initially greeted the person. Then there's all this violence happens. There's screaming. There's a fight going on. Murphy's scared. He goes and hides. He goes and hides in his person's room. The room where his person's scent is the strongest. He goes and hides. We don't know that Murphy barked at all. Murphy might have been scared and just gone and hidden in Kaylee's room. And it's another dog that was barking, completely irrelevant to this case. However, defendant argument assumes without proof there was no doors left open in the home after the suspect left. This assumption was only speculative. And what if Murphy was outside at some point because the backsliding door was left open and then that was closed, maybe in the morning? Because there was people in the house. There was people in the house before they called the cops. I just think it's irrelevant. It just makes no sense to the overall probable cause and whether a magistrate will sign a search warrant or not. This pedantic shit is irrelevant. The assumption is not only speculative, but contrary to evidence in his proffer that the sliding glass door to the residence, the same door towards which DM reportedly saw the suspect walk, was left open. We don't know whether it was or not, and it's irrelevant whether it was or not. Thus, if the dog heard barking was in fact Murphy, it could have come back inside. It could have come. Judge Hippler, please. He could have come back inside through the open door and gone into Kaylee's room on his own, where he evidently remained. So the killer came in through the back sliding doors, left the door open. Murphy comes downstairs, goes out, right, probably scared because there's all this killing going on, then comes back inside, finds his people murdered and goes and hides. How do we know? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. We don't even know whether it was Murphy barking. It could have been a completely different dog. Just ridiculous. So Detective Murray describes the test he and Detective Payne performed to ascertain whether the dog heard on the audio was inside or outside. Police report indicating Murphy did not have blood on him. Screen capture of Officer Nunes' body camera when he arrived at the house, showing Murphy lying on Miss Gonzalez's bed with no blood on him. Okay. There is simply no evidence to adopt defendant's speculation that someone brought Murphy inside after the suspect left the residence. Consequently, defendant has not shown that the failure of law enforcement to so speculate was a material exculpatory omission that was intentionally or recklessly excluded. A Frank's hearing is not warranted. All right. Cell phone data. Cell phone data. This is also silly. Not as silly as the dog, but this is also silly. In my humble opinion, as a non-lawyer. Issue 7 challenges Exhibit A insofar as it discusses data from defendant's phone, referred to as the, I'm just going to call it phone, not the 8458 phone. I'm just going to call it phone. In Exhibit A, conclusions drawn herefrom. He asserts that Exhibit A falsely implies defendant's location on the night of the murders based on improper speculation, misrepresentation, or omission about 4 topics. The geofence return. Oh, geofencing is allowed in this case. Who'd have thought? 2, the timing of the second AT&T warrant, the time defendant's phone stopped reporting, and the cell tower coverage area. Defendant proffer on each of these topics is insufficient to warrant a Frank's hearing. 1, the geofence return assertion was not false or misleading. Defendant's first take... Dear me, sorry. Defendant first takes issue Detective Payne's assertions regarding the geofence return. In Payne's Exhibit A, Payne informs the magistrate that a query of the phone in these returns did not show the phone utilising cellular tower resources in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. I'm going to cough again. I think I'm good. Okay. He then states, so this is in the PCA from Payne. Based on my training, experience, and conversations with law enforcement officers that specialise in the utilisation of cellular telephone records as part of the investigation, individuals can either leave their cellular telephones at a different location before committing a crime or turn their cellular telephones off prior to going to a location to commit a crime. This is done by subjects in an effort to avoid alerting law enforcement that a cellular device associated with them was in a particular area where a crime is committed. I also know that on numerous occasions, subjects will surveil an area where they intend to commit a crime prior to the date of the crime. Depending on the circumstances, this could be done a few days before or up to several months prior to the commission of a crime. During these types of surveillance, it's possible that an individual would not leave their cellular telephone at a separate location or turn it off since they do not plan to commit the offence on that particular day. Okay. Defendant contends that Detective Payne's claim that criminals will turn off or leave their cellular phone elsewhere before committing crime is highly speculative and conclusory. Oh dear. Complains about them not speculating on whether Murphy was outside or inside or who brought him in or did anyone bring him in or was he barking at all. So complains that they don't speculate on that, but now complains that they speculate that based on his knowledge and experience of criminals, he's just speculating that criminals sometimes turn their phones off when they're committing a crime. It's not much of a speculation, is it? It's pretty well known that people will do that. Dear God. Defendant has not demonstrated the statement was deliberately or recklessly false. What Payne's Exhibit A shows is that Detective Payne, based on his training and experience, drew one conclusion about the lack of a return to the exclusion of other possibilities. While there certainly may be other reasons for the lack of a return, the mere fact that the affiant did not list every conceivable conclusion does not taint the validity of the affidavit. Further, Detective Payne's conclusion was expressly based on his training and experience and conversations with other experts, which further belies any suggestion that this was deliberately or recklessly false. A Frank's hearing is not warranted. 2. Challenge to timings of the second AT&T warrant is conclusory. Detective next challenges the 1 hour turnaround from when law enforcement received the return on the first AT&T warrant and submitted the application for the second AT&T warrant. So they did it just an hour apart. According to the defendant's expert, Thomas Savlensky, maybe, it takes 1 or 2 days at a minimum to secure call detail records from AT&T and then covertly analyse and peer review them. He surmises that the fact Detective Payne was able to complete these tasks in 1 hour means that the FBI had already secured and analysed the information and provided their analysis to Detective Payne, who simply reported to the magistrate what he was told without telling the magistrate the truth about how the investigation truly unfolded. Well, there's a speculation if ever I heard one. Franks does not contemplate such conclusory accusations. The challenger's attack must be more than conclusory and must be supported by more than mere desire to cross-examine. Mr. Savlensky was not involved in the investigation, and his attempt to impute untoward conduct to law enforcement lacks any foundation. Just accusatory. Without evidence. As Detective Payne testified at a prior hearing in this matter, he received the return from the first AT&T warrant and immediately turned the material over to the FBI agent Balance to begin deciphering it, while Detective Payne started on a second search warrant application. So it wasn't that they've completely analysed the results of the first one before they submitted the second one. They did the first one and then immediately sent the second one off. They're like wanting 2 different aspects from AT&T, so they did them as 2 different warrants rather than one big one. I don't understand what the problem is here. I really don't. While defendant may wish to cross-examine Detective Payne on this issue, it is not a basis for a Franks hearing. Further, even if the FBI had already secured the records prior to receiving the return on the first AT&T warrant, defendant has not shown how the inclusion of this information in Exhibit A would have negated probable cause. Absolutely. Absolutely. Franks hearing not warranted. Defendant has not shown the alleged misstatement regarding when the defendant's phone stop reporting was intentionally false or exculpatory. It's ridiculous, this. This is crazy. Defendant next exerts that a Detective Payne misrepresented the time defendant's cell phone stopped reporting to the network to imply that defendant was travelling towards Moscow between 2:47 and 2:54 when he was not. Oh, dear. On this point, defendant relies foremost on the affidavit of his expert, Mr. Savlensky, who states, Affiant has found inaccurate information in Officer's Payne affidavit. I'll start that again. I'm struggling here. Affiant has found inaccurate information in Officer's Payne's affidavit for search warrant, an application for an order for a pen registry or a trap and trace device. Payne makes a false statement in his affidavit. Payne states in his affidavit, Bates 03, blah, 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 at approximately 2:47 a.m., the phone stops reporting to the network. This statement is erroneous. Payne has failed to advise the court of the following. Okay, this is based on what the defense expert says. The 2:47 a.m. traffic is a continuous 7-minute stream on multiple towers that ends at 2:54. Payne does not document this 7-minute traffic. So there's 7 minutes that's a question here. Payne did not inform the magistrate about these handoffs, so cell tower stuff, which would have clearly and directly shown him the fact that on November 13th, 2022, from 2:47 to 2:54, Mr. Kohberger's device was not heading to Moscow as purported by Payne, but was indeed heading southbound from Pullman, Washington. The fact that Payne either disregarded or was unaware of the handoffs and direction of travel of Mr. Kohberger's device gives this affiant grave concern over the lack of training and experience Payne has in mobile forensics and the credibility of his affidavit. So potentially you think, So for 7 minutes, Kohberger was traveling south. He would have been to go from Pullman to Moscow through its direct route, which is only a short journey. He'd be traveling east. But in fact, according to the cell tower handoffs, he's traveling south for 7 minutes. So not traveling to Moscow. So that's potentially a problem. You can get a long way in 7 minutes. You go like, 3 miles in 7 minutes? Depends. 4 miles? Depends how fast you're going, doesn't it? All right. So, defendant's other cellular expert, Cy Ray, likewise contends he has reviewed multiple search warrant affidavits prepared by Detective Payne. So they're all in to discredit Detective Payne here. We're seeing a foreshadowing of what's going to happen at the trial. So the cross-examination of Detective Payne is going to be painful. The cross-examination of DM is going to be probably infuriating. I'm going to find it infuriating. We've got this foreshadowing effect. Bryan really was stargazing. Unfortunately for Bryan, has anybody gone and looked up the weather in Pullman, Washington, or surrounding areas for the night 22nd into 23rd of November 2022? Has anybody gone and looked up the weather? It was cloudy that night. Oh, you don't do stargazing when it's cloudy. No, you don't see the stars very well when it's cloudy. Oh dear. All right. Okay, so Detective Payne in his statement that defendant's cellular phone stopped reporting to the network at 2:47 is blatantly false and not supported by the AT&T data. In addition to these two expert affidavits, defendant includes in his proffer the AT&T call detail records that purportedly reveal the actual time the phone stopped reporting to the network was 2:54. So the defense are not claiming that Bryan didn't turn his phone off. They're just saying he did it 6 minutes later. 7 minutes later, whatever. That doesn't change the probable cause, even if they got it wrong and it wasn't 2:47 when he turned his phone off and it was 2:54. That doesn't change probable cause in whatever way at all. It really doesn't. Oh dear. As an initial matter, defendant has not provided the search warrant affidavit identified by Mr. Slavensky with his proffer. The only search warrant affidavit authored by Detective Payne that defendant has provided in his proffer is Payne Exhibit A, which is dated December 29th, 2022, and accompanied an application for a warrant for defendant's arrest. The court cannot consider the effect that alleged misstatement would have had on probable cause without the correct affidavit before it. However, the search warrant affidavit referenced by Mr. Slavensky is otherwise part of the record in this case as to other motions, and the court will take judicial notice of it for purposes of deciding this issue. Okay, so it's worked out that we do have this information in other ways. We're going to take that into account. The court does not find defendant's proffer deserving of a Franks hearing. First, defendant has not established the challenge statement is a misrepresentation. Detective Payne expressly qualified his statement by noting it was approximation only. As he testifies to an earlier hearing in this matter, Detective Payne is not an expert in deciphering CDRs. Thus, he provided the records to FBI Special Agent Balance to analyse and relied on Agent Balance's analysing in drafting the pen register affidavit. That affidavit disclosed both Detective Payne's reliance on Agent Balance's analysis and Agent Balance's training and experience to the magistrate. To the extent the approximation was off, a 7-minute discrepancy, particularly one occurring more than 1 hour prior to the homicides, is not so far outside the approximate window as to render the statement false. So what if he's 7 minutes off? It was a mistake. He's 7 minutes off. It doesn't change the fact that Bryan Kohberger could have got to Moscow. Even if he went south for 7 minutes, he could have doubled back on himself. He could have been trying to throw off the cops. He could have travelled south for 7 minutes, turned his phone off, and then come back and gone to Moscow the quick way. He could try to have been clever. He tried to have been clever by doing this, but it didn't work. Further, even if the statement could be characterised as false, defendant has not shown it to be intentionally or recklessly so. In fact, not even Mr. Slavensky goes so far input this mens rea to Detective Payne. Rather, he points out that Detective Payne either disregarded or was unaware of the handoff data that would have revealed the correct time the phone stopped reporting. Based on Detective Payne's self-described lack of expertise in analysing CDRs, it is reasonable to infer the latter, which amounts to, at most, negligence. Further, Detective Payne relies on Agent Balance to decipher the CDRs, which he is entitled to do in executing probable cause affidavits. Finally, defendant has not shown Detective Payne's mistake in identifying the handoff data to be exculpatory. Exactly. It doesn't matter. If he travels south for 7 minutes and went like 3 miles south, and then turned his phone off, and then turns around, comes back and goes to Moscow and murders 4 people, right? It's not exculpatory whether the actual day, the time that he turns his phone off is 2:47 or it's 2:54. It doesn't matter. He's still got plenty of time to get to Moscow to do the murders. Come on now. Mr. Slavensky claims it was exculpatory because the correct interpretation of the data would show the device was not heading to Moscow as purported by Payne, but was indeed heading southbound from Pullman, Washington. There are 2 problems with this assertion. First, the pen register affidavit represents the device was travelling south at 2:47 a.m. when, according to Detective Payne, it last reported to Witt. On November 13th, 2022, at approximately 2:42, the phone was utilising cellular resources that provided coverage to 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment G201, the Pullman, WA, hereafter the Kohberger residence. At approximately 2:47, the phone utilised cellular resources that provided coverage southeast of the Kohberger residence, consistent with the phone leaving the Kohberger residence and travelling south through Pullman. So they even said he was travelling south. Oh my God. Thus, because the exculpatory information identified by Mr. Slavensky appears to have been represented in the affidavit, the court is at a loss as to how a correct statement of the time the phone stopped reporting to the network would affect probable cause. Absolutely. It doesn't matter, does it? They've said it was travelling south. The only thing they got wrong was that it was 7 minutes later when he appears to have turned his phone off. Second, even if the pen register affidavit did misrepresent the defendant's cell phone and said he'd to Moscow at 2:47 and 2:54 a.m. as opposed to southbound from Pullman, a correction would have no effect on probable cause. Travelling south from Pullman at 2:54, more than an hour prior to the homicides, does not disprove the defendant could have driven to Moscow after 2:54. Exactly. After his phone stopped reporting to the network. As the affidavit points out, footage from multiple videos obtained from the neighbourhood around 1122 King Road shows several sightings of a vehicle matching the description of defendant's vehicle starting at 3:29 and ending at 4:20. So he's easily got time to travel from south of Pullman, 254 is south of Pullman. It's about, 15-minute drive to Moscow, going the direct route, 15, 20 minutes. So he turns up at 3:29. He's had plenty of time to get there. Dear God. Dear God, given the proximity of Pullman to Moscow, the fact that defendant may have been travelling southbound in Pullman at 2:54 does not exclude him as a potential driver of the suspect vehicle from the probable cause standpoint. Moreover, the strength of the other evidence described in the pen register affidavit cannot be overlooked. The defendant describes how CSLI data showing the defendant's cell phone left his apartment at approximately 2:45 and started travelling south before it ceased reporting to the network approximately 90 minutes before the homicides occurred. The phone then starts reporting to the network again approximately 90 minutes after the homicide occurred, at which time it was travelling south on Highway 95 just south of Moscow before looping back north into Pullman via Highway 195. Consistent with the CSLI surveillance cameras from the Pullman area shows a white and a Elantra consistent with the defendant's vehicle returning to the area of defendant's apartment at 5:25. It's all consistent. It works. It works. The timeline works. I'm telling you, if the timeline didn't work, I would have seen it. Because I'm timeline. The timeline here makes sense. As Detective Payne pointed out, individuals commonly turn off their phones prior to committing a crime to avoid alerting law enforcement of their presence near a crime scene. The obvious inference is that defendant turned off his cell phone to avoid detection until he was clear of the crime scene. Why didn't he just leave his phone at home? The absolute clown took his phone with him. Why didn't he leave it at home? Because then he could have said I was inside all night. I didn't go out. I suppose they'd have seen his car leaving, but there's that. But at least it couldn't have been corroborated by any cell tower data. Dear me. In addition, the affidavit describes footage from multiple surveillance videos that captured a vehicle consistent with defendant's make 3 passes by 122 King Road between 3:29 and 4:20. I want to know whether the DoorDash driver caught him on dashcam. I want to know that. At which time it departed from the residence at a high rate of speed. On one surveillance camera, according to Detective Payne, the suspect vehicle did not appear to have a front license plate. He noted that defendant's vehicle had been registered in Pennsylvania at the time of the homicides, which does not require that front license plates be displayed. Finally, CSLI evidence shows at approximately 9 a.m. November 13th, a mere 3.5 hours after defendant's return to his apartment, he again left his apartment and returned to Moscow, utilizing cellular resources that provided coverage to 1122 King Road. From between approximately 9:12 and 9:21 before travelling back to the area of his apartment at 9:32. So see, it only takes 15 minutes to get to King Road to his apartment. This is consistent with defendant returning to the scene of the crime. So it's a very short run. Very short run. Detective Payne also noted that defendant's height, weight, and ethnicity were consistent with DM's description of the perpetrator. He informs the magistrate that defendant was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University and had studied how technological data is used by law enforcement. This inference to be drawn from this information is that defendant knew, particularly from a technological perspective, how to cover his tracks. Maybe he thought by taking his phone and travelling that big long route down south and then back up, he could have said, I was out stargazing all night. Oh, I must have lost cell coverage. He's trying to cover his tracks. What a clown. What an absolute clown. When the extent of evidence recounted in the pen register affidavit is considered as a whole, it is evident to the court that the Detective Payne stated defendant's cell phone was travelling southbound from Pullman when it stopped reporting to the network at 2:54. There was still enough probable cause linking defendant to the homicides to justify the issuance of the search warrant. Consequently, a Frank's hearing is not warranted. This judge was not born yesterday, in my opinion. Defendant has not shown any omission regarding cell tower coverage area was reckless, intentional, or material. The final claim raised by defendant is that Detective Payne omitted important information about cell tower coverage in Moscow when he stated the records for the phone show that the phone utilizing cellular resources that provide coverage to the area of 1122 King Road on at least 12 occasions prior to November 13th, 2022. According to Mr. Slovensky, the two towers that provide AT&T service to King Road also provide coverage to all of Moscow, including the area defendant is known to shop. Thus, defendant claims Detective Payne misled the magistrate about the location of defendant's cell phone on these 12 occasions. The accusation here is one of omission. Specifically, whether Detective Payne recklessly or intentionally withheld from the magistrate that the same towers provided service to King Road also provided coverage to all of Moscow. There is no direct evidence that Detective Payne intended to mislead the magistrate, nor can it reasonably be inferred given that defendant has not shown the omission to be material or exculpatory. While including the information may shed some doubt on whether defendant was actually in the vicinity of King Road on these 12 occasions, as opposed to some other nearby location, it does not disprove Detective Payne's statement or otherwise exculpate defendant. No, it doesn't. Like, the fact that he goes to Moscow on a semi-regular basis actually provides more evidence, in my opinion. If I was a jury member, I'd be like, oh, so he's familiar with Moscow, so he knows the area. He's not just gone there on the off chance, the first time ever. Like, if he shops there, he eats there, maybe that's where he's come into contact with the victims. Not that they necessarily know each other, but maybe he's seen them around. Maybe he followed one of them home one time and became obsessed. That makes more sense than saying he just went and sat outside King Road for the entire time that he was in Moscow. It makes more sense that he actually was out and about, because he had to find these victims somehow. He had to know where the residence was and approximately who lived there. So he's been doing a recce. He's maybe come across one or more of these victims on his excursions, maybe eating out. Remember, Zana and Maddie worked at the Mad Greek. Maybe he went and ate there one time and came across them and followed maybe one of them home. Well, didn't have to be stalking them, didn't have to be, messaging them on social media. He just has to know where they live. So it makes more sense to me to make that argument, actually, if I was a jury in this case. Okay. Where was I? Well, including the information may shed some doubt on whether defendant was actually in the vicinity of King Road on these 12 occasions as opposed to some other nearby location. It does not disprove Detective Payne's statement or otherwise exculpate defendant. Given the breadth of exculpatory evidence included in Payne Exhibit A, it is difficult to ascribe ill intent to this alleged omission. Further, and importantly, probable cause did not rise and fall on the evidence of defendant's 12 prior visits to Moscow. A Frank's hearing is not warranted in this issue. Search warrant sought by Detective Payne through the pen register affidavit was for historical data. Okay. Defendant has not met his Frank's burden on issue 9. Footprints outside DM's door. Oh, this is ridiculous. This is crazy. This is equivalent of the dog barking. This is scraping the bottom of the barrel. Okay. In issue 9, defendant challenges as false statement made by Payne Detective Exhibit A about a footprint outside DM's door. Detective Payne states, during the processing of the crime scene, investigators found a latent shoe print. The detected shoe print showed a diamond-shaped pattern similar to the pattern of a Vans type shoe sole just outside the door of DM's bedroom located on the second floor. It is consistent with DM's statement regarding the suspect's path of travel. Defendant contends the last statement is false, noting that the footprint is closer to her bedroom door than she reported the subject to be. So they're arguing on this latent shoe print and how close it was to DM's door. Come on, please. There are no other prints before or after it, and it's not positioned towards the sliding glass door, which is where DM said the suspect walked after he passed her. Yeah, but he had to walk to the upstairs, didn't he? Right, it's a latent shoe print. It's not a blood-soaked shoe print. It's a latent shoe print. It's not saying there's one blood-soaked shoe print, which would be weird if it was coming in. Detective further claims it was an intentional or reckless statement. Or defendant further claims it was an intentional or reckless statement because its only purpose was to corroborate DM's unreliable statements. There is nothing false or misleading about Detective Payne's statement. The shoe print was consistent with DM's account. She told law enforcement she saw defendant walk past her bedroom door after she opened it for a third time, and then opened the door again, and the guy was right there. I think he was walking past my door and saw me. I would say he was about 3 feet away from her. DM's bedroom door is immediately at the landing at the base of the stairs leading to the upstairs bedroom. The shoe print was therefore reasonably within the subject path of travel as described by DM. And she's not got a tape measure out to measure 3 feet. She said approximately. In a fuzzy state of mind, he might have been closer to her or further away from her. This is great in the bottom of the barrel. Further, the fact the footprint was located only in one spot and there were not others before or after it does not make Detective Payne's statement false about the path of travel. Consequently, defendant has not shown Detective Payne's statement was false or otherwise misleading. Additionally, defendant has not established that DM's interview statements were wholly reliable, as discussed before, or supru, or that there's otherwise a need to bolster her credibility in the magistrate's eyes through false corroborations. Consequently, even if the shoe print was not totally consistent with DM's account, defendant has not demonstrated that the statement was made deliberately or recklessly. Moreover, defendant has not articulated how incision of the statement would have any bearing on probable cause. In fact, it would not. A Frank's hearing is not warranted. All right, we're getting to the end now. We're getting there. All right. Grand jury subpoenas. Issue 11. Faults law enforcement for omitting information in the Exhibit A supporting the search warrants for Amazon records, which was issued on May 8, 2023. Specifically, he asserts that the affiant, Detective Mowry, requested the warrant in reliance on federal grand jury subpoenas issued by the FBI to Amazon, but did not tell the magistrate information about the timing and scope of information obtained and relied upon. Defendant further states he is unable to ascertain whether the omission was material and exculpatory because the grand jury subpoenas have not been disclosed. Defendant has not established this is an issue. This issue is proper subject for a Frank's motion. He has not provided the search warrant affidavits at issue, has not identified any false statement, and only omission he challenges is that Detective Mowry did not disclose undefined particulars about the timing and scope of information obtained from the grand jury subpoenas. He admittedly cannot show this omission was material and exculpatory, and therefore cannot establish that probable cause would have been affected had the omitted information been included. What this challenge appears to be an attempt to use Frank's as a means for discovery, which is not its purpose. Consequently, a Frank's hearing is not warranted. So they're trying to get information about... okay. All right. Moving on. All right. Lack of connection between defendant and victims. Okay. So defendant does not provide the search warrant application for Amazon or the warrant itself. Issue 12 applies to warrants. Okay. All right. In issue 12, defendant challenges law enforcement's omission in their Exhibit A of the fact that their investigation failed to reveal any connection between defendant and the victims. Defendant claims this information was material exculpatory because it sheds doubt on law enforcement's theory that defendant was the right person. So they're basically claiming because he doesn't have a prior relationship with any of them that he can't be the killer. So strangers never commit crimes. Strangers to people never commit crimes. Did you know that? Now, although it is true that you're more likely to be murdered by someone you know, the fact that he was a stranger to them does not negate the possibility that he was the killer. He didn't have to be in their social circle. He didn't have to even be following them on social media to have eyes on them and know that they live there, and for some godforsaken reason, he felt they needed to die. Come on now. Come on now. However, defendant has not established the lack of connection was factually conclusively known to law enforcement at the time the search warrant application was submitted. Thus, he cannot establish whether it was intentionally or recklessly omitted. Moreover, this omission was not material or exculpatory. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Oh, God. Had law enforcement found a connection between defendant and the victims prior to applying for search warrants, it's reasonable to assume the connection would have been disclosed in the search warrant affidavits. The fact it was not disclosed necessarily allowing the magistrate to reasonably infer that no connection had yet been found, yet she still found probable cause to authorise the search warrants, as was reasonable to do so. Consequently, defendant has not carried his burden under Franks. Dear God, I said that all without taking a breath. Defendant has not met his Frank's burden on lack of victim DNA in the apartment and vehicle. Well, it's because he's been dust deviling everything. He's been vacuuming and cleaning up. No nexus. There's no nexus. There's no nexus. Hang him, draw him, quarter him for no nexus. All right. Similarly, defendant challenges law enforcement's omission in the Exhibit A of the fact that lab testing performed by the Idaho State Police did not reveal the victim's DNA in defendant's vehicle or his apartment. Defendant contends the lack of DNA is devastating to law enforcement's theory of the case and was intentionally or recklessly omitted. In his apartment, I don't understand why they would think that there would be victim DNA in his apartment. If, like, he didn't know them, he's no connection with them, they'd never been to his apartment, why would there be DNA in his apartment? In his vehicle, I could understand the argument there, that how come there's no victim DNA at all in his vehicle? I think he changed his clothes. Changed his clothes before he got in his vehicle. Probably put a plastic sheet down on his driver's seat. Thought he was being clever. And then he had nearly 2 months, a month and a half, to clean his car. Indeed, when they bust into his parents' house in Pennsylvania, he was wearing rubber gloves, putting stuff in baggies, and they believed that he was taking stuff out of his car or cleaning his car, doing something with his vehicle at the very moment that he was arrested. So he's had 6 weeks to clean his car. I don't understand. All right. However, as with the prior issue, defendant has not established when law enforcement knew of the lack of victim DNA in defendant's vehicle. And of course, right, when these search warrants were written and signed off, law enforcement wouldn't necessarily have known that there was no DNA in the apartment or his vehicle. So it becomes irrelevant anyway. The 3 ISP lab reports relied on by defendants were issued on March the 2nd, 8th, and May 23rd, 2023. Thus, it cannot be said that law enforcement knew of the lack of DNA. Okay. All right. So, to have known that there was lack of DNA. Okay. So the judges got the dates here. He's so thorough, isn't he? How thorough is he? It cannot be said that law enforcement knew of the lack of DNA until the last report was issued. Defendant has not provided or identified any search warrant affidavit submitted after May 23rd, much less explained why the lack of DNA was material to the probable cause of those warrants. Okay. So no search warrant affidavit submitted after May 23rd. So okay, so they may not have known. They may not have known then. But they may have known then. But does it matter whether they knew there was DNA or there was a lack of DNA anyway when the search warrants were written? Because the apartment, I don't have an issue with. Why would there be DNA? Unless he was taking trophies and souvenirs or walking in like muddy and bloody and stuff. But if he's taken off his clothes before he gets in his car and then thoroughly cleaned his car in the 6 weeks that he had to, to stew over this, then that's why there's no DNA in his car, because he's a clean freak and he carries a dirt devil about with him. Dear God. All right. In his reply, defendant claims that the actual testing for DNA was performed by ISP long before the 3 lab reports were issued. He asserts he has reason to believe, defendant's argument, presumes Franks require law enforcement to disclose evidence does not exist or has not been found. This is not a realistic burden, particularly given that search warrant affidavits are typically executed under rapidly unfolding circumstances. Absolutely. So the time span of when a search warrant is issued versus when a lab report comes back is pretty much irrelevant. This is a rapidly escalating investigation. So things are being done simultaneously. So not required to disclose every detail of an investigation, describe every wrong turn or dead end. Certainly, then there's no requirement to disclose a lack of evidence, particularly when the obvious inference to be drawn from the absence of any mention of such evidence is that it does not exist or has not been located. Okay, so where were we? In his reply, defendant claims that the actual testing for DNA was performed by ISP long before the 3 lab reports were issued. He asserts he has reason to believe that the results of the testing were verbally transmitted to law enforcement at the time. How do they know that? However, the evidence submitted by defendant does not support his assertion. First, defendant submits the ISP lab notes from lab report 28 and claims that the testing was done on February 13th, 3 weeks before the report was actually issued. A closer review of those lab notes reveals that testing of the various items at issue in lab report 28 took place between February 13th and February 24th. The final report was issued 4 working days after the last test. Thus, this evidence does not show that law enforcement knew well before Lab 28 was issued that there was no victim DNA on tested items. This is at best defendant's speculation. This judge is so thorough. Dear me. Defendant also submits lab reports from a hair and fibre analysis performed by the FBI lab. The first lab report, dated January 27th, 2023, reveals that hair and fibres collected from the crime scene was not consistent with defendant's hair sample. Well, it was someone else's hair then, obviously. They found some hairs. It's not the defendant's. There was people in and out of that house all the time. So there's going to be hairs from other people. It's a party house. The second lab report, dated February 28th, reveals that hair and fibre samples collected from defendant's vehicle and apartment were not consistent with the victim's hair samples. They were someone else. Again, this evidence does not support defendant's assertion that law enforcement knew of the lack of victim DNA in his vehicle and apartment as of January 5th. All right, so anything that was issued on January 5th, well, that's long before they knew that these things were not defendants. Defendant also submits what appears to be a worksheet from a DNA handling on January 23rd and 24th by the ISP lab. It's entitled Differential DNA Extraction. There's no findings or conclusions made in the worksheet, nor is there any indication of what DNA samples were handled and what DNA extraction means within the worksheet. It's thus unclear how this worksheet supports defendant's argument. At best, it can be said that law enforcement was aware, as of February 28th, that the FBI's testing did not reveal the defendant's hair and fibres, victims' DNA hair and fibres in defendant's apartment or vehicle, but it's evident from the various lab reports that law enforcement's investigation with regard to DNA was still continuing. Therefore, there is no basis for law enforcement to definitely there was not an absence of, that must be a spelling mistake, an absence of victim DNA in the vehicle or an apartment until the final reports were issued. In other words, defendant has not demonstrated an omission, much less it was intentional or reckless. Further, defendant has not demonstrated how including this omission would have affected the magistrate's finding of probable cause. He contends that it would affect all warrants issued January 5th and beyond, but he has not provided any search warrant affidavits from this time period for the court consideration. Oh, no. However, based on Payne's Exhibit A, that included in defendant's proffer, the probable cause as of December 29th included, amongst other things, that the DNA profile obtained from the trash pull of the Kohberger family trash was determined to be from the biological father of the source DNA left on the knife sheath at the crime scene. Given this evidence, no reasonable magistrate would conclude that the lack of victim DNA in defendant's vehicle or apartment weeks after the crime would negate probable cause. Thus, a Franks hearing is not warranted. Yet, the magistrate sees that you've got a DNA on a knife sheath, and that matches DNA from trash, and it matches that this person, they've got the DNA from the trash, is likely this defendant's father. The DNA is found at a knife sheath next to a murdered person. That fact alone is probable cause. That fact alone, despite everything else, is probable cause for an arrest. I promise you, that fact alone is probable cause. It doesn't matter if there's no victim DNA anywhere else, as measured weeks later, doesn't matter. Even the timeline in that doesn't matter. Even if they knew that there was no victim DNA in the vehicle or in the apartment as of December 29th, which they absolutely did not know because Bryan Kohberger wasn't even arrested on December 29th, even that would not have negated probable cause, given that the defendant's DNA was at that crime scene. 100% was at that crime scene. There's no way a magistrate would have said, oh, well, I'm not going to sign this because there's no victim DNA in the vehicle, even though there's defendant DNA at the crime scene next to a victim. These attorneys are dreaming. They're in dreamland. Defendant has not established the Franks elements by a preponderance on issue 8. Defendant's identification of IgG. We're nearly there, guys. We're nearly there. And again, if you want me to do a separate video just on the IgG order, I will do. You have to let me know, though. Okay, in issue 8, defendant challenges law enforcement's admission in Exhibit A that defendant was identified through an alleged unconstitutional use of IgG. He contends law enforcement should have disclosed in Exhibit A that, 1, the methods used by the Othram Labs to conduct the IgG allegedly did not meet minimum standards. Wow. Defendant does not identify what search warrants this issue applies to, but presumably it includes all warrants. Othram Labs was the company Idaho State Police contracted to perform the IgG testing on the sample. Defendant tells me, okay. All right. Does not meet minimum standards. Wow. 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 Othram is a well-respected lab, I don't even know. 2, that the FBI failed to document its own IgG search using Othram's data. 3, that the FBI manipulated Othram's data to create a much larger DNA profile. And 4, that the FBI violated its own policy and that of the commercial IgG databases it used when it uploaded the DNA profile to databases, restricting law enforcement use. Defendant contends these omissions from Exhibit A were purposeful. He also argues the omissions were material and exculpatory because they would have undermined probable cause by exposing law enforcement's false narrative of the investigation. Oh, they're all out to get him. As mentioned, a court permitted a full Franks hearing on this issue. So they had the Franks on this issue. The evidentiary portion all was hashed out in court, and the order, so the separate order, this order, which I will read if you want me to, another 29 pages. I'll read that, not today, but maybe tomorrow if you want me to, and we can get into that. So this order from Judge Hypner is a result of an evidentiary Franks hearing that they had on that one issue, the IgG. Okay. All right. So as mentioned, the court permitted a full Franks hearing on this issue. The court's finding of fact on this evidence and testimony presented and its conclusions of law are fully set forth in its memorandum decision and order on defendant's motion to suppress genetic information. So that's the 29 pages. Filed contemporarily herein and incorporated herein. As the court determined in that order, law enforcement's use of IgG to identify defendant as a potential suspect was not unconstitutional. The court found that regardless of whether the FBI arguably contravened its own policy and contravened that of MyHeritage and GEDmatch when it uploaded the DNA profile to their databases, it was not of constitutional importance. Now, this is very controversial. Very controversial. This sets a precedent, arguably. All right. Moreover, defendant has not established that the search warrant affiants knew when submitting their respective Exhibit A's that the FBI or Othram did anything untoward with regard to their IgG searches. Detective Payne was the only person who had submitted a search warrant affidavit from whom defendant elicited testimony at the hearing with regard to IgG. Detective Payne testified that he knew the FBI was handling the IgG search after Othram Labs ceased work and said his communication with the FBI about the issue was sparse and limited to check-ins to ensure the IgG search was continuing. He testified that on December 19th, 2022, the FBI provided him only with defendant's name and instructed that it was to be considered solely a tip. Because that's all IgG is. It's a tip. It's not evidence. It's a tip. At some point after defendant was identified through IgG, the FBI walked Detective Payne through the details of the family tree it had developed from its search. That's why this was a closed hearing and why stuff's been redacted, because it's like some family tree. There'd be people named in it that are completely irrelevant. But that was all. Further, he testified to having no familiarity about the IgG database or rules that applied to them. Given the lack of evidence Detective Payne knew or even had reason to know that Othram or the FBI did anything unconstitutional in their IGG searches, defendant cannot establish any omission in this regard from Exhibit A was intentional or reckless. The only evidence of alleged untoward conduct was the FBI searching genealogic databases that did not permit law enforcement searches. No evidence presented that the method used by Othram to conduct the IgG testing failed to meet minimum standards. Yeah, that's slander. Whilst there's evidence presented that the FBI created a larger SNP profile than Othram did, even defendant's expert, Danny Helwig, found no reason to suspect the FBI of wrongdoing in this regard. The court found Detective Payne to be credible and reliable. Okay, where were we? Even assuming Detective Payne had been privy to the methods in which Othram and the FBI conducted the IgG search, Franks does not require law enforcement to divulge every detail of their investigation and detail every lead followed or rock unearthed for evidence. Absolutely. Probable cause affidavits are neither designed nor intended to be an opportunity for reviewing magistrate to grade the police work on the case by requiring law enforcement to show every step that led to the evidence relied upon. As I've been saying all along, as observed by one circuit court, there is no legal requirement that a police officer recite every fact that he knows in a search warrant affidavit, so long as what he does say is sufficient to support a judicial officer's finding of probable cause. And probable cause is not certainty. It's just that probably, maybe this defendant might have committed a crime. That's what they're saying. It's not certainty. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's probable. That's why it's called probable cause, not certain cause, not beyond a reasonable doubt cause. It's called probable cause. Affidavit, it must be more or wholly considered. It needs only provide the magistrate with a substantial basis for concluding that probable cause exists. It need not present all the relevant information. They could hold everything back except one fact, and that would be enough for probable cause. If it's substantial enough, they could hold everything else back. And dear God. And also, when they let's say probable cause for an arrest, there's a lot that they don't know. Because once they've made the arrest, then they're able to investigate stuff that they previously didn't have access to. So there's that. But that's obviously specifically related to the arrest warrant, which I'm not going to talk about. But, okay. In other words, the Fourth Amendment does not set forth some general particularity requirement. It specifies only two matters that must be particularly described in the warrant: the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. That's it. That's all. Likewise, there's no requirement that police include evidence as a straw man, simply so that evidence can later be attacked. A warrant application is judged on the adequacy of what it does contain, not on what it lacks, on what a critic might say should it have been added. The focus of an application for a search warrant is whether, based on the evidence that is presented, there is probable cause that evidence will be found in a particular place, not whether an evidence gathering technique used was potentially unconstitutional. No, that's for something else. That's different. Noting that when a magistrate issues a warrant based on potentially illegally obtained evidence, typically the manner in which the affidavit evidence is obtained is not before the magistrate, and the magistrate is not asked explicitly to endorse the evidence gathering procedure. Whether this may be fodder for a later motion to suppress is not the basis for a Franks challenge. Interesting. Franks, in cases of omission, asks simply whether the affiant left out evidence which, if known, would negate the inculpatory effect of the existing evidence and leave an insurmountable deficit. in proof of probable cause. Defendant has not established that omitting defendant's identification through IgG evidence or the means in which IgG was performed had this effect, as I've been saying all along. Since God knows when, since the IgG first came up, since very early days of the case, I've been saying, even if they throw out the IgG, it does not throw out the search warrant. It doesn't. The probable cause for the arrest and the search warrants stand on their own. They don't need IgG for it. IgG is an additional extra, a useful additional extra, but they do not stand on it. The arrest warrant, the search warrants do not stand on IgG. They'd have got to Kohberger regardless. As I've been saying all along. And probable cause is not certain cause. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt cause. It's probable cause for a reason. They did not have to include IgG. They did not have to include any other evidence that they might have that we're not currently aware of. All they had to do was show the magistrate that there was probable cause, and they did nothing wrong in leaving stuff out. They did nothing wrong at all in that probable cause or in those search warrants. In my humble opinion, and also in the learned expert opinion of Judge Stephen Hippler. All right, where were we? All right, defendant has not established that omitting defendant's identification to IgG evidence or the means in which IgG was performed had this effect. Indeed, had the IgG information been included, even with the problems complained of by defendant, its only effect would have been to add to probable cause, not distract from it. Exactly. Thank you, Judge Hippler. Thank you. Consequently, relief under Franks is not warranted. Conclusion. Based on the foregoing, defendant's motion for a Franks hearing is denied. It's so ordered. 19th day of February 2025. Stephen Hippler, District Judge. I'm just about losing my voice. Just about losing my voice. But how's that for a judge's order? Compared to the likes of Gull over in Indiana, denied without hearing, how's that for an explanation as to why a Franks hearing or anything at all is denied? It's very, very detailed, comprehensive, absolutely. It was a slog, but very, very informative. Very informative. I'd much rather read these into the record on this channel than I would a one-pager with a couple of sentences denied without hearing over in Indiana. This is way more satisfying to know that Judge Hippler has pretty much addressed every single comment, and there's no ambiguity whatsoever. No ambiguity. So, all right. Let me know. Oh, I've been on here 3 hours. Really? I didn't realize I've been on here 3 hours. I know it's gone dark while I've been talking. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised my voice is going if I've been talking for 3 hours. It didn't feel that long. But I'm going to go right now. I'm going to go right now. All right. So we had... I've already said thank you to Jennifer and Bird Dew for the donations earlier on in the live stream. So thank you to those people. Thanks as always to the mods. As always, stuck it out for 3 hours. And again, let me know if you want me to do the genetic stuff. Let's just finally get rid of this poll. So we've had 329 votes on the poll. And the results are 76% currently think Kohberger is guilty versus 24% who think he is innocent. 76-24. It's actually more. I thought it'd be more divided than that. Anyhow, all right. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna play us out with an outro. that isn't related to Delphi. Oh, thank you. Last minute donation there, Mommy of Huskies, for the $5. Thank you so much for exhausting my voice. Oops, got rid of that. All right, guys, I am out of here. I shall speak to you very soon. Bye, guys.